everybody. This is the planning board meeting March 6, 2018, and I'll read our agenda and then get us going here. Our agenda is that we'll start with the public hearing on the zoning articles for our upcoming town meeting. Next will be housing issues, then general plan update, annual report, and other business and minutes. There's no changes to the agenda, so we'll begin. So I'll open with a public hearing on the zoning articles. We are being televised. When you're recognized to speak, please remember to identify give your name and address, and we'll begin. So our hearing is in session. And we'll begin with article, in our package, it's called Article A. This is the article on apartment. So it's to amend section 3.2 of the zoning bylaw. This is an article, a warrant article that amends our existing accessory apartment bylaw. Right now, the bylaw allows accessory apartments, small apartments, either in the main building or in a separate dwelling or separate building, but it's restricted to family members and you can't provide, or a caregiver, but you cannot charge rent. So the basic amendment here is to change that so that it's not restricted to family members or caregiver, and you can charge rent. The reason for doing that is to provide some housing diversity in town, and enable some revenue generation for a homeowner so that they maybe can stay in town. With our high taxes, this may enable someone to stay in town rather than leave town. It also may enable them to provide housing for someone who will be a caregiver or help take care of the place. So it's written so that the owner has to be on site, has to live there, but the owner can live in either the primary dwelling or in the accessory apartment. That's the principal change. I can read through the whole thing, but I think those are the main changes.
One other change to that you might mention is it increases the maximum size from 800 to 1,200 square feet.
Right. So the significance of this is that, as I said, it enables some housing diversity in town. It also, as I say, may be financially beneficial to the town if empty nesters stay in town. Another aspect that was in the amendments by removing the requirement for family, it also removes the requirement for the accessory apartment to be returned to its prior apartment condition. So if somebody modifies, if it's already modified, or if someone modifies it in order to function with plumbing and to function, it doesn't mean you have to remove all that stuff. All you got to do is renew the permit. It's a 2-year permit, so you don't have to remove those upgrades and things like that. If you don't want to, you can, but you don't have to. Just renew the permit when it's due. So that's another aspect to it. Oh yes, I think Grace, thank you. Grace is pointing out another aspect is that in the revision is that such unit may not be rented for a period less than 30 days. And so that's just that's something that wasn't in there before. It's added to restrict sort of comings and goings of maybe a Airbnb or something like that. So Those are the main features of the apartment bylaw. And are there any discussion at the board? And if not, I'll ask for folks. Yes. Can you're welcome to come up and speak into the microphone. All right, and then, I know you know how to do this.
Susan Tyler, Western Avenue. One quick question to follow up on what you just said. This is the 30-day limit, you said, is to discourage Airbnbs. So,
Coming and going.
comings and goings. But so are you saying that someone can't rent their place for an Airbnb for 5 days, 3 days, 29 days? Are you restricting all Airbnb rentals?
No, this is only accessory apartment. That's a good question. It's just accessory apartment. So, right now, if there's an existing accessory apartment, it's already restricted. So if you want to rent your house or rent a room in your house,
So how are you going to, I'm just being the devil's advocate here, how are you going to monitor, follow up, double check whether the person that's living in my accessory apartment is a family member, a caretaker, this and that, versus an
yeah,
Airbnb?
yeah. Really, it's going to be the same way most zoning bylaws are monitored. If somebody notices, it's like, right now, it's, the existing bylaw right now is really dependent on somebody noticing if there's a problem, and then it gets called to the attention of the
Just
building
checking
inspector. So it's
because
really going to be the same way.
They're out there.
Well, that's a
Thank you.
good point.
Richard Robinson, 117 Mill Street. Two questions, one also on the 30-day thing. I'm a little working this through in my head, but it seems as though what all this says is that you have to rent for longer than 30 days. It doesn't say that you have to rent to the same person longer than 30 days, and you could imagine renting for 30 days to X and then one additional day to 15 other people, which I don't think is your intention, right?
Yeah, this is to provide some control or some restriction.
But I don't think you have that. If I have such a place at my property and I bring in somebody for 30 days, this says I can rent to anybody I want to for any short period of time after that, because after all, I've got 30 days that meets the
Right, we need
statute.
to amend the language here. The intent was to try and discourage constant comings and goings.
Right, and I don't think this does
That's
that.
what we need to
add
I think
per
that actually
rental.
needs some tweaking.
Okay. So what's?
To any single person for less than 30 days or something like that.
Any single
If that's what you mean. That was one point.
Good.
Second point is on item number 3, the 1,200 square feet. That sounds reasonable, but I wonder whether if you have a property that is logically dividable at 1205, this would suggest there's simply no way. You would have to board up a closet or something like that. And I'm wondering whether you want to put in something that says without permission, without a special permit for that. It just seems like a hard and fast number that somebody's going to come to you and say, my kitchen is 5 square feet bigger, can I please do this? And this doesn't allow you to
It
give
is a
that
special
permission.
permit.
Sorry?
It is a special permit.
Yeah, but I don't, the way this is written, I think, says if you're above 1,200 square feet, don't bother applying, because there's no way to do it. And it seems as though if you don't ever want to see one that's bigger than that, then this is the right wording. But if that's a margin that has some fuzzy boundaries, it seems though you would want to accommodate.
Do you think 1,100 with some fuzzy boundary would be okay?
I think wording it said that it's anything you like, but with special permit for
Yeah.
going over that number probably makes more sense. Or not, it may be that 1,200 is too big for anything you have in mind.
Can the ZBA use some discretion if something is 1,205 feet?
As
Are
he
they
says, not the way it's worded now.
Not the,
Yeah. Yeah.
okay.
Well,
So they need some wording about discretion for for the
Or just,
ZBA.
or just limit it. I mean, you could have a limit someplace.
And the previous
Well-
limit was 800 feet, so
Yeah,
this is an
this is the
expansion.
wording that was used for 800
Yeah.
square feet. So I understand Richard's point, and I think, yeah, if you want fuzzy, then we'll say 1,100, plus or minus, but in the end, you're saying the same thing. So it's-
1,200 may be a perfectly
Yeah, yeah.
hard cutoff,
Yeah, yeah,
but if you don't want a hard cutoff, this language
yeah, yeah.
probably needs to be changed.
It's a 50% increase from what the maximum is now,
Yeah.
but it is
Okay,
a hard press.
I got the input.
Long ruler.
I can tell you, my view is that I think I'm okay with a hard cutoff at some point. And I think this number is pretty good. But I hear what you're saying. Yes, in the back,
Yes, me in the back, again, on number 3, take the phone
Susan
number.
Tyler.
Susan Tyler, now you're saying you're going less than 300, now you're going to the 1,200. It looks like what was crossed off here, stricken through, was at 30%. So at some point you were doing a percentage. So instead of this 800, 1,200, 1,205, 1,208, put it back to a percentage of what the building size is.
Yeah, that's a good point. The language before read, "The gross floor area for such unit shall not exceed the lesser of 800 square feet or 30% of the gross floor area of the dwelling, including any additional thereto for such unit." So we could stick that back in.
I think we felt that we were trying to go for clarification because before it still couldn't, with it being the lesser of 800 square feet, it still couldn't be any bigger than 800 square feet.
Yeah.
And so here we're saying it still can't be any bigger than 1,200 square feet. So trying to figure out what 30% is just got kind of fuzzy when we're the end of the day, we're still saying it can't be bigger than 1,200 square feet. So.
Yeah, if you want to get to 1,205, you can't get it by saying the lesser of 1,200 square feet or 30%.
Depending on the size of my houses that exist right now, or some of the houses in town where we don't all have huge mansions.
Yeah,
And so therefore, if I've already got a small house,
right.
I mean, I think my house is 1,800, maybe 1,500 square feet.
Yeah. Yeah, so
I'm
you,
never gonna get to the 30%.
that's right, so you're better off with this, with our proposed language, because you get to 1,200.
But I'm just saying, if you put the percentage back, somebody had it there and then they took it out.
That's right, and we took it out because it says the lesser of 800.
You crossed out the lesser.
I'm exactly correct. We crossed out the lesser of because it's, what we have here is less restrictive. If we had left in the lesser, then that means the maximum is, it used to read 800, now the maximum is 1,200, or 30%. So if your house was small, then 30% would only make it smaller. So the lesser, if we use the 30% gross floor area, it's still going to be lesser than. So we simplified it because we're saying, hey, if you have a small house, you can still have a 1,200 square foot. It gives you more ability to have a larger accessory apartment, the way we've proposed it, by taking out lesser, because the lesser means it's going to be the smallest of the two. And here we're just saying it can't exceed 1,200.
And this language of this desire for increasing to 1,200 square feet is something that's been batted around planning board before my terms. So for a long time, it's been determined that 800 square feet was potentially too small for a realistic accessory dwelling.
Anything else? All right. I think what we'll do is, we'll move on to I think if that's the input, I got it. I think we'll move on to each article, and then at the end of the hearing, the planning board can summarize and make an opinion. Does that make sense? Okay, on to Article B. This is Article B, is to amend Section 3.2 of the following subsection in our zoning bylaw 3.2, this is number 34. Outdoor entertainment in the business general district is subject to the granting of a special permit for a maximum of 2 years by the ZBA, which may impose conditions in addition to the following. So this is about outdoor entertainment in the business general district. So the language, and does everybody have a copy, or I can read this? If everybody has a copy, then I don't need to read through everything. But it says music will cease promptly at 11 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays and 9 p.m. on Sunday through Thursday evenings. Exceptions may be granted for Sundays before a Monday holiday. And the big deal here, the big change here is that because we felt comfortable with the next paragraph, which is B, that there's a method of measuring sound that's repeatable and it's used elsewhere. So we thought, okay, so now we have a way to measure sound, which we didn't have before. So I'll just read that section because I think it's significant. Amplified music is permitted, but the sound must be kept to a maximum of 85 decibels in accordance with L10 guidelines measured 50 feet from the source. L10 refers to National Guideline for Measuring Noise Levels over time and is recommended by the Environmental Protection Agency. The permit holder is responsible for the measurement and monitoring of sound or noise, which shall be made with a sound level meter, decibel, or dB meter. The instrument shall be maintained in calibration and good working order. That's a significant change. Suitable sound meters range between $50 and $250, and there's an app for your phone that's not bad. So the next section here is that it's we struck out in the next section on restaurant, the use is permissive in business G district, prohibited in all others. We struck out, so we took out, providing that that in no event is live or mechanical entertainment permitted outside the building, except that the ZBA may grant a special permit for a specific event featuring outdoor live or mechanical entertainment, which event is to be held for the purpose of raising funds for any nonprofit, civic, or charitable organization, subject to the reasonable conditions the Board of Appeals may impose, and so forth. So the reason for this is that in the writing of the general plan, in the survey that was done in 2014, it was very clear the majority of the town would like a more vibrant town center, and this seems to be directly in response to what the majority of the towns seem to want, and so this will be sent to the. All of these articles are proposed warrant articles. They all are changes to the zoning bylaw. The town meeting will vote on these. They require 2/3 vote. So it's a 2/3 vote decision to enable outside music and take out the restrictions. Take out the restrictions that it be for a specific fundraising event. So, comments? Yes. Thank you.
Stephen Constantine, 32 North Main Street, right across from the Sherbet Inn. So if I understand what you laid out there, so I can see a significant change of scope from what we have now. Outdoor entertainment, mechanical, live, electric, whatever is going to be allowed, not just by restaurants, but to any business, correct? Or any individual in the business general, the 5 areas that are designated as business general. Is that correct?
Correct, but we're adding a restriction. Right now, any business can do whatever they want. There's no restriction on businesses. Only restaurants. Restaurants are the only ones that have any restriction.
Okay? So restaurants has been taken out, any business can participate, can hold these events.
Right, we're making it so that businesses and restaurants are treated the same as a business.
Right. Okay, the second thing that I picked up is we're taking out the nonprofit. So currently, the way the bylaw is written, the event has to be held for a nonprofit or a charitable event, and that's being taken out, correct?
Yes.
Correct.
So that means anything, birthday parties, weddings, bar mitzvahs, rock concerts, whatever we want to do, a business in business general can host that event. All right. Third thing I'm seeing here, and I'm not sure, I didn't catch the dates, but to me, it looked like it was unlimited. In other words, right now, it's restricted to 2 events per restaurant per year, and now it's pretty much unlimited. Is that correct? And
Correct.
it's only limited by the days, so I think I heard Thursday, Friday, Saturday, and holidays by exception. Is that correct?
The hours are different.
And the hours are also extended to 11 o'clock, whereas in the past couple of years, they've been 10:30.
Yeah, it reads, music shall cease promptly at 11 p.m. on Fridays and Saturdays, and 9 p.m. Sunday through Thursday evenings. Exceptions may be granted for Sundays before a Monday holiday.
So so these events can be held 7 days a week, correct?
According to the bylaw, yes,
According to the proposed
to
bylaw.
the proposed bylaw.
Right.
yes.
Right, all right. I just wanted to give some observations on what we've seen since the law was changed since 2015. So right now, 32 North Main Street is right across from the Heritage. And what we've seen outdoor entertainment being held at the Heritage for not-for-profit events. So they're already doing it. They're doing outdoor events there. They're not getting the permit, okay? There've been complaints to the police about it, so that's already taking place. The second thing I wanted to bring up is the Brew Fest from last year. So that went through the permitting process and went through the zoning board. There were specific conditions that had to be met, just like we're talking about here about specific conditions when one of these events is going to be held. One of the conditions last year was to the erection of sound barriers. That was disregarded. Music started, no sound barriers were erected, again, in direct violation of the ZBA. Third thing I want to say is there are multiple disturbing the peace calls that have gone to the Sherburne PD, not for outdoor noise, but for indoor noise. So right now, there'll be an event at the Sherburne Inn, and windows will be open, doors will be open, music and people will spill out onto the patio, and it's just as loud as can be. And the police have been called. I know they've gone to talk to the inn. They'll turn things down. Anything after 10:30, I know they've talked to them as well about it's got to get turned off at 10:30. But again, it hasn't been a good track record since 2017, since this bylaw went into effect. In all honesty, I'd like to see this bylaw just go away and we go back to the way we were doing things before. That's really all I have to say.
Okay, thank you, Stephen. Anybody else?
Just a quick question, where did the noise standard that you're incorporating here come from? What's the experience of using it for this kind of event versus something else?
I mean, we tried looking at other towns and what kind of guidelines they had for outside entertainment, and it was a challenge. I mean, and we also looked at other wedding venues that were located in among neighborhood areas with residents were abutters and tried to find what they were using for their guidelines. And 85 decibels seemed to be a fairly standard upper threshold limit for for what you might have a reasonable entertainment level. A lot of, certainly have scoured other band and DJ forums, and a lot of people say if they have a venue that says they have a threshold of 85 decibels, it's too low, no one will dance, and they refuse to participate. So trying to figure out what, what's reasonable, it has been a challenge. just kind of basic conversation, a lot of standards out there say is about 50 decibels. A noisy bar tends to be around 90 decibels just on its own. So we figured by going 50 feet from the source eliminates the need of trying to figure out exactly where property boundaries are. So the source in most cases, if it's amplified music, would be the speaker for measurement, or if it's non-amplified, it would be the music instrument, so a guitar or harp or something. And so, it's not perfect, and certainly if anyone else has any feedback that's in the industry of measuring sound, we are certainly open to suggestion.
The L10 reference, is that all?
L10 was found in a couple other municipal guidelines, and it's my understanding that it's a measurement of sound over time, so it's not, you've got a drum and you get one beat that might briefly, register above, but L10 is a measurement of what's a sustained level of sound.
Well, the EPA, it's an EPA, it's EPA method of measurement. It includes over time, but also is the maximum. So if it says it can't go over 85, it can't go over 85 dBA, period. It doesn't matter the,
If you apply the L10 standard, it says you can't be, I believe, you can't be over 85 decibels more than 10% of the time. Everything I know about this, I learned in the last 2 minutes on the internet, but I'm pretty sure that's what it means.
okay. I'm just looking at two different things, but, so I'm looking at, let's see, I did the same kind of thing you're doing, Richard, probably, but I did it a while ago. And it talks about Los Angeles and Seattle and Chicago and different places, to put it in perspective of sound level. And the examples I'm looking at, they did similar things, but so a typical home stereo volume is 80 decibels, a lawnmower is 90 decibels. A freight train is 80 decibels at 100 feet. Shouting at 1 meter. A food blender is 85 at 1 meter. Normal speech is about 60 decibels at 1 meter. So, let's see if I have, curbside of a busy road at 5 meters is about 80. So in any case, that's the, thank you for that correction. So in Chicago, they had inside and outside limits. So this just says there's limits of 85 decibels measured 50 feet from the source. So that, I think the way it's written says that if it's an inside, to one of Stephen's concerns, if it's inside or outside, if the windows are open, you still can, this doesn't specify. So this, in that sense, would provide greater protection.
John?
Yes. And
We have a speaker,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah, that's
I'll
Hi,
go
so
ahead.
I'm Eve Asbury. In terms of full transparency and disclosure, I do not pay tax in this town, but I am a legal immigrant, and I am part of the diversity that you guys are after, because I rent from Steve Constantine, and I live at number 34 North Main Street. So a couple of things that I'd like to sort of mention that, you know, in your documents, you're referring to this area as a business area, and there are certainly more businesses than there are residents, but it isn't a 100% business area. We're not sort of talking about a business park. where it's completely industrial and it's 100% zoned for businesses. So that would be my number one point, because you've got Elliot's former home that Steve now owns, you've got 32, 34, and you've got the home beside me, which I believe has 3 independent units in that are also rented out. Again, the diversity, the income that you guys are after here. So that's number one. Number two, I've made so many phone calls to the inn, and I've had some really quite Saturday Night Live-ish type of conversations, such as I call, nobody answers the phone because they can't hear it, and then eventually somebody will answer the phone, and they can't hear me because of the loud music in the background. And at one event, they said, "Oh, thank God you've called, because now we can turn the music down." So they were actually told, let the DJ do whatever he wants until I phone, and then turn the music down. So even though I made that request, it did go down slightly, admittedly, but it didn't go down enough. So once again, I had to call the police in. And I feel it's a total waste of time for me to be calling the police on such a trivial matter. And I have to call them every time there's been an event, even if it's inside, I have to call. So now if we're saying that this is going to happen 7 days a week, then, good luck to the police, which again I think is a complete waste of time, because I assure you the sound is over 85 decibels, and, I'm going to be on the phone. So I think that, a couple of things. I mean, to Steve's point, it would be brilliant if this could just go away, which it probably won't. But if it could be restricted in some way, and if there could be some sort of penalty. So if the sound is over 85 decibels, if the police are called in, and I always call the inn first, and I have Jen Suskin's phone number, and I text her and so on. If there's sort of a series of events that happen, I do feel that there needs to be some sort of penalty, because again, to Steve's point, last year, the music was loud at the outside non-for-profit event, and there's no recourse. So, it really doesn't matter. It's as if, we're sort of stating the speed limit is 40 miles an hour, but I'm going to drive at 100 because I don't care, because I know I'm not going to get a ticket. I mean, there has to be something there, because it's going to be a total waste of time for the police, that I can guarantee. And the record isn't good. I've tried to be as neighbourly as possible. I've been really, really patient. I've had meetings, and I don't know, they're just deaf. I don't know whether the music's been too loud for them for too long and they're just not hearing.
Thank you. Alex?
First of all, you're speaking at 68 decibels. So, in this meeting, I'm here in this issue for the Sherburne Business Association. And we contract with the inn for one event a year to create a fundraiser that is both good for the community, brings people together, and raises money that the Business Association brings back into the community through different projects. We have looked at many venues, and the Heritage is the most convenient. It provides us with the necessary structure we need, and we find that the music is an added part for the enjoyment of the people there. In the special permits that we've received in the last several years, we have complied with all of the rules that they set down, and we've tried to keep it under control. Clear night, music may bounce a little bit more. Heavy night, it may not. But I do not want to see us lose the opportunity to continue to provide service to the community. So we like to see something in here that allows us to continue to use the inn on that Friday or Saturday night, whenever it's scheduled. But for us, it's only once a year. So I don't defend the Heritage for whatever other things they do, or the noise that comes out of their bar or anything else, but it's important for us that we have this provision.
Okay. Thank you.
Hi, my name's Will Constantine. I live at 30 North Main Street, so next to Steve Constantine and Eve. I think it's great that the town of Sherburne wants a more vibrant downtown center. But on the other hand, most of Sherburne doesn't live in the downtown center and realize how much noise exactly the Sherburne Inn makes. And when we're talking about this provision, we're mainly talking about the Sherburne Inn. I believe we can all agree on. I think it's kind of a ridiculous assumption to make to have a bylaw that constrains the downtown and the businesses or restaurants to only hosting 2 events per year
And then go to
at this certain, noise decibel or whatever, and then spreading it from 2 events to 365 days upon which they can have these events. I mean, that's just, especially when you consider and you take into account the fact that they aren't already, abstaining to the laws or the bylaws that have already been put into place by them. The fact that, my father or that Eve have to call the police because their noise is too loud or because they haven't erected these sound barriers. I think that should be taken into account. You should consider the fact that, they haven't already, assured us of the fact that they are responsible with these 2 days that they get per year. Why would we not take that into account and then expand it by, 160-fold? It just seems kind of ridiculous to me. That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you.
Susan Tyler, Western Avenue, living next to what used to be the GM plant with all their noise and traffic, now living next to Odessa and all their noise and traffic, and a substation next door with all their noise and traffic. I was just wondering if anybody here on this table can tell me what is now known as the Heritage. In my town, it was the Sherburne Inn. Before it was the Sherburne Inn, it was a tavern. Anybody know what year that business has been running in that house? And all the other houses along that street, downtown, that were businesses, back when downtown Sherburne actually had 2 railroads, tracks going through? It's been a business area for a long time. And I fully support the use of it. And if you can come up with some controls as far as the noise, but then again, I moved in knowing I had GM next to me, and I moved in knowing I had Odessa and the noise and the traffic. And I haven't complained once. Thank you.
Thanks.
Betsy Johnson, also Western Avenue. I'm not affected by the noise of the Heritage or the various occasions that produce the noise, but it does seem to me that opening this up so that they could do things, or somebody could do things every day in the week, is excessive. I see no reason why it can't be limited. If 2 seems too limited, then make it 6, but not 365.
I guess it was, so some of this goes to not just talking about the Heritage, but thinking of events within, with trying to do a broader guideline of noise for the whole business general district, and then thinking of events that might come up, such as a farmer's market and you want to have a fiddler outside, or you want to have a movie night, an early movie night on the lawn for families to come into town, and things that we want to do as a community and also still try and provide some guidelines for abutters. So I agree that it does seem too open-ended perhaps, that right now anyone can do anything 365 days a week, I guess, the way it's written, and some sort of restrictions would be a good idea. it's just trying to figure out then where those days, those hard, fast restrictions are. And then, again, going back to the way things sit currently, any business can do, the spa could have a concert, the spa could do whatever they want, and there's no guidelines. The bank had a concert when they reopened, and there's no restrictions, but the restaurant's the only one that is restricted. So we're trying to actually provide some guidelines for a broader district that where there are no guidelines. And for police purposes, having a guideline where they can come and say, show me what your decibel meter is reading, to the whoever's producing the music, it gives the police a little bit more something to stand on than just say, oh, can you turn it down? We've got some complaints. So there is some, the intent is certainly not to make abutters' lives miserable. There's an intent to try and foster the sense of community that we all love about Sherborne, and also give us a place to congregate and be together.
Marion?
I wanted to add a little bit to what Addie said. We have competing values here. People who move to the town center should expect a certain amount of noise, more than you would, say, out in the countryside. On the other hand, if there are homes in the town center, they have to be habitable. We have to respond to the needs of the abutters as well. But I think there are tweaks we can make to this bylaw that might help. The level of sound, we chose 85 decibels. Some of the examples you gave, John, are actually very loud sounds to have going for 3 hours at a time. We might reconsider the 85 decibel limit, and it's going to come up again in the farm events thing, which is also could be a problem of the same kind. We could reconsider limiting the number of events during the year or days of the week or whatever, so that at least it's predictable. I think what's missing from the bylaw right now is the recourse. There's no really clear guidance to anyone who feels that the limits have been abused. You called the police, but you're right, this isn't a good use of the police. There has to be a clearer recourse, and perhaps written into the bylaw, a consequence. Because otherwise it's just going to be a constant, oh, it was 85, no, it was 95, no, it was 75, it could go back and forth and waste everyone's time. So this is a hearing, it's not the final bylaw. We're looking for input, and I'm glad we're getting it, so.
Yeah, so that's come on. While you're coming up, I'll fill in some space. This reads, outdoor entertainment is subject to the granting of a special permit for a maximum of 2 years. So if things aren't being complied with, they can have the permit revoked, or they can not get it renewed. Yeah, it doesn't say it can be revoked. I was just looking to see if that's stated elsewhere in the use of regulations. But I don't know the answer.
Well, first of all, it is a zoning provision, so there is a fine for a zoning violation of $300 per day. That's the maximum fine for a zoning violation under state law. And typically, typically the special permit would specify the conditions, and then if those conditions are not met, then usually it would include a provision for revoking the permit if the conditions are not met.
Okay. Does it need to state someplace that it can be revoked? if the conditions aren't met?
It doesn't need to, it could, but it also, it could be left to ZBA when they grant a special permit to put that provision in the special permit.
Uh-huh.
But if it's specified in the bylaw, then it will always be there, you know, wouldn't be left to the discretion of ZBA.
All right. Okay.
It seems to me it would be good to have something in the bylaw so that, you know, it's not a ZBA extended hearing every time it happens. If it's in the bylaw, it also will serve as a deterrent.
Is a decibel meter a big deal?
No.
Then, don't you think the two cars that are out there, they don't have to go into the inn, they can stand 50 feet outside, read the darn thing, and give them a ticket, and if they accumulate more than 2 or 3 of them, then it gets revoked.
Well, one problem with this is that we're asking the restaurant owner to do the monitoring.
That's fine, they should do it. But to say that they aren't accomplishing it when the police are called, the police should have the capacity to look down and say, yep,
Oh, sure.
they're blasting away there.
But meanwhile, they will have turned the noise down. I mean, I think it's going to be hard to,
Right now, the police they haven't got a lot of simple ways of dealing with it.
Right.
no.
That's always been the weakness of the first part of our zoning bylaws.
Yeah.
Is that we state things like noise and odors and fumes, but we don't say how they can be measured. And in this case, now we have a specification for how they can be measured.
I think we should request that the Sherburne Business Association put on its list of things to do with the money they earn at the Brewfest.
If you would like to make a grant application.
Okay, two decibel meters.
But at the same time, it's
Yeah.
free app on your phone, too.
That's right.
Okay.
176 Western Ave, Seth Malloy, and I'm also not much affected by it, but it does, I think what you were just talking about kind of covered my first point, is that enforcing this is going to be really difficult. You know, the technology is varied and it's, you know, how accurate it is. The phone app is going to be much less accurate than, you know, a more advanced device. They're going to turn the music down. I think it'll be a really difficult thing. And it also seems, I'm wondering why, from everything I've heard, it seems like people can have events. Almost all the businesses are happy with the events that they can hold. You know, I've been to concerts on the common out here, and I don't think there are a lot of complaints about that. You know, someone brought up the idea of a fiddler at a farmer's market. I can guarantee you're not going to get any complaints about a fiddler at a farmer's market. But it seems like there is a specific problem that is perpetuating, and this is really just enabling that problem to get worse. So what problem is it solving in addition to making a particular problem worse?
Well, one problem is it's providing a method of measurement. So that it's addressing is a method of measurement. The other is to increase the vibrancy and opportunity for social interaction in the town center by enabling more outdoor events.
Is there a lot of problem with that now? Because it seems like we got a lot of mentions of different events that happen outdoors that got a permit and it was fine.
It also has to do with the sustainability of the businesses in the town center, in particular the Heritage. You know, that part of their right to life basically is to make the best of their business venue, and that's what they would like to be able to do. But the question, of course, is setting the limits, and I think we're not quite there yet.
To what you just said, if I could just say something. Eve and I spoke with Jennifer Ziskin about the noise level last summer. One of the things that we suggested is that back area where they do hold the events, put a fence around it. I mean, that's going to contain a lot of the sound. She didn't want to do that.
And so it does seem to me that there's just, it's almost like there's an existing problem that we're exacerbating. You know, people did move in with the expectation that they're in a business center, but maybe there wasn't loud parties there all the time, and that's changing. I guess that sums up my comment.
All right.
Oh, and reiterate the fact that there should be an easily punitive measure taken. Because, right, you can call the police, you can complain, but it doesn't really matter to the business. There's no recourse.
Okay. Well, it's going to, so, Marion, I think in what others have now just said in response to what you said, a recourse, it sounds like there is a recourse, it's not being used, that there are complaints, it's not going to pass the town meeting vote if the complaints and if the issues aren't being satisfactorily addressed. Another aspect could be to reduce the number of days. And I think in the discussions we had at different times, it was if C&L Frosty or the Heritage wanted to build a reputation of having outdoor events, then they need that identity, and it's hard to restrict it to one day or a few events a year. But maybe there's some compromise there. And I'm not in that business, I don't know, but maybe it's, Thursday, Friday, Saturday or something. I don't know the answer to that, but maybe that's a restriction that could be considered. A lot of good input. Alex?
In the past, the Business Association has made the application for the outdoor music for the heritage or for the, am I to understand that this will be permit issued and applied to by the heritage or by the restaurant or the business that helps to do it? Or are there groups that won't come in and do it and be part of that application?
No, it'd be the business applying for a permit. Yeah.
And it would be a broad permit for outdoor music with that in accordance with the guidelines with whatever language we end up with at the end of the day. But Heritage, it's a lot of people that I've talked to have, think, oh, what a beautiful place for a wedding. And then they get told, oh, sure, you can book your wedding here and you can have a lovely ceremony out on the grass, but you can't have a harpist, you can't have any music for your ceremony. So that's, maybe that's the extreme, but as far as to my knowledge, they've complied with that, and it's.
They had a harvest actually last summer.
I shall now,
Again, it wasn't a big deal, but again, they're out of compliance. And there's no teeth, there's nothing being put in the bylaws to say, sorry, you shouldn't be doing this.
Okay, well, it's like sometimes some of the language that we've tried to address with the articles that we're proposing, such as even going back to the first one that was discussed, the accessory dwelling. We know that people are renting out their accessory dwellings, and to a degree, let's put some guidelines in there for something that's already happening, so that then we do have a chance to monitor, if there's being abused, that there's some recourse, whereas without any guidelines, then we have nothing except for, like you say, you call the police and they say, okay, turn it down, so.
Okay. Yeah.
Just want to note that an email with comments on this article also came in late this afternoon. Nothing different than what's already been mentioned, but the number of events, the 85 decibel limit, and the ability to revoke were the primary comments on that.
Okay. Yeah, I see. The 85 decibels is loud. And in our language here, in our proposed language, it says measured 50 feet from the source, and distance makes a difference. So, okay. Anything else? Good. That's a lot of very good input. On to Article C, which is special uses relating to agriculture, horticulture, and floriculture. The purpose of this is, by the way, just to be clear, this is the planning board hearing on these articles. And then there will be an advisory hearing that's been rescheduled. It was to be tomorrow night. It's been rescheduled for Wednesday next week,
14th.
the 14th. And these articles and others will be discussed. And then there will be an advisory hearing, and I don't remember the date, but it's a few weeks from now.
Yeah, it's a Saturday in
Saturday.
March, maybe the 24th.
That sounds right. But just for information, then, there will be an advisory hearing on these articles and all the others. On the 24th. Okay, so, the next article that we're talking about is, the purpose of this is to encourage farming and agricultural operations within the town by permitting, in addition to principal agricultural activities conducted on the site, farm events using farm grounds and accessory structures, while also minimizing the impacts on abutting properties. So this is a case of doing what's being done in other communities, and is looking for ways to encourage not just farms, but any agriculture, horticulture, or floriculture operation to have to host an event or make use of their property in some way that's secondary and incidental to the principal use of the agricultural purpose, but increase the opportunity to have some cash flow and be a sustainable agricultural operation. The idea in part is to, where do we want to be in 30 years? We'd like to have farms in town. In suburbia, there's more and more and more pressure on farms, and so if we lose farms, they get developed. We lose open space, and we're looking for ways to preserve open space and preserve agricultural where we want to be in 30 years. So this is intended to provide an opportunity for agricultural operations to find ways to get some added income that's secondary to their principal purpose of agriculture. I think everybody's heard of corn mazes, but that's kind of an iconic example. Weddings and things like that are hosted are becoming popular. So the purpose of amending of this warrant article is to provide agricultural operations some additional opportunities. And
it would still require, though, it opens the opportunity for an agricultural facility to apply for a special permit. So
Right.
it still then is a second stage, and that then has a number of guidelines.
I think I might have a few things to say. I submitted to Gino a week ago an alternative suggestion. I don't see that this proposal really enhances anything I do agricultural. And many of the things that you talk about under the scope of what the state is doing and the promotion they're doing with agritourism and agri-entertainment are things that we can do by right without special permit. The only time special permits have come into play is on those parcels of land that are under the APR program, the Ag Preservation Restrictions, where the state has a share of it. But the festivals, the hay rides, the occasional wedding, the gathering, those types of things where they're incidental and they bring people to the farms are the things that will help those farms survive. And going through special permits and site plan review and all of that that you've got listed here, including the old ones, just don't work for me. And it doesn't enhance my farming operation. And doesn't really make me feel that you're agriculturally friendly when it comes to things to support the sustainability of farms for the long term. So what I sent to Gino, which you may have copies of, defines agritourism, agro-entertainment, and suggests that these are uses as a right, which they are under state law, and kind of tells you to take the rest of these and throw them away. And that's pretty much where I stand on that.
Well, I'm glad you're here, because I've got some questions. This is a warrant article for Sherburne zoning bylaw. So where the state law takes precedence, then this wouldn't change anything. So,
But it does confuse the issue, though.
well,
If I were to sit in this room and read the zoning law, then look and see something I'm doing over here, the question comes up.
yeah. So I think and this is a hearing and this is good discussion, but my impression is that the state law for agro-tourism and those types of things does not always take precedent. So, and that's why in this, we've specified something we've just become familiar and a big fan of, is measuring sound. So it's trying to support the same goals, but apply some measurement. And the same thing, this says 85 decibels, 50 feet from the source.
I'm not planning to have a Woodstock anytime soon, but
Well, that's a relief.
Own operations, or the ones that I've seen, and some of the festivals that farms have done, which they bring people in to partake of all of the events on the farm and the open space and everything. The sound has never been an issue. Most of them are not putting up big speakers, there's no power out there. And that really kind of takes away from, my core being as a farmer. But site plan review, if I'm going to have one of these events that comes under your control, what are you going to come down and review on my farm?
Well, this is site plan review, and it specifies for things that are secondary and incidental to the principal use of
Everything
agriculture.
that I would
So-
propose to do in my agricultural operation is incidental to my core, what I grow. And it's all to help promote that or to sustain that. I'm not going to put a commercial building up and run a restaurant down there. I think that comes under something totally different that's not even under agritourism. And I think in what was defined to you, put some limits to what you can do, as well as all of these things are evolving. Nothing stands still. Farms are under a tremendous amount of pressure, are seeking new ways to try and generate enough revenue to stay sustainable and be able to stay in business, keep their land open. And I don't find that this helps me.
Alex, if you have a barn and you want to have a wedding there, people to rent it, and you want to have food and music, can you do that now under the state law?
Yes, it's being done all over the state in a number of places. If I were to build that building just for that purpose, that
That's
doesn't
different.
fit
No,
the law.
But if you have a barn, if you want to renovate the barn to make it a better place to do it, even a nicer place for that wedding, at what
Wanna
point?
take the character out of my barn? Oh, come on now.
No, but,
No,
pretend,
the key
I'm
grace
just trying
is-
to understand is,
The
are there limits?
The key grace is that it's incidental to the current use of the barn. So if I convert it
Yeah.
just for weddings, am I gonna still store boxes in there or still keep cows in there? See, I mean, the incidental part of it,
Right.
it really can't be the main focus for your business. The main focus of your business has to be the agriculture and the sale of those products.
But if you've got lovely land and a great view and your barn is facing in a nice way, and therefore you want to put money into it and just use it for weddings, is that stretching it?
There's a farm, a person that bought a farm up up in the North Shore. I don't know what was Amesbury up in that area. And they wanted to convert the barn that was on there to do weddings into it.
Uh-huh.
But it was really their primary goal, or what their
Yes.
source of income was going to be.
Yes.
Under my interpretation of agriculture, Chapter 48, Section 3, that's not permitted.
Okay,
That would be special permitting.
okay,
Topsfield, it's in Topsfield.
Topsfield, yes.
Okay. So, is there a place for this bylaw to let someone do that?
Now you're looking at commercial buildings in residential zones. That's a whole different zoning issue.
No, I'm just looking at a renovated fancy barn for a wedding on a farm to supplement the income. It's no longer used for anything else but making money by having weddings.
I don't see that as fitting the criteria of agriculture.
What if it still has, as far as I guess the question is the definition of primary, potentially the agriculture doesn't bring in as much, maybe the wedding could bring in more money than the agriculture, but
Well,
you
it's
still
not how
keep your
much money you
agriculture.
bring into it, it's
Rich
just,
wants to say
it's
something.
about what the primary use of the building is for.
Yeah.
If the primary use becomes weddings and it doesn't apply, the primary use stays as farm use,
Yeah,
and once in a while you use it for weddings.
that's not what this is about. This is about the guy who wants to make money so he can keep his farm, but he's gonna do it by running a wedding barn.
Well, there's 6,000 of those people in this state. So
Yes, so I think, I get your point that it's got to be secondary, and if it's already covered, then, but my concern is that I don't think the state law does always take precedent. If there's an abutter, if there's a change to the use of the hypothetical barn or a corn maze where there wasn't one, and now it's annoying an abutter, sometimes this town can
Well,
take,
my orchard on
precedent.
Rockwood Street never had any abutters till Grace built her house.
I know. Yeah.
There now.
That's a really critical issue, because as we find our commercial activities are getting hemmed in.
Right.
Green Lane has 4, maybe 5 new houses coming in right next to the orchard. I had an email yesterday that says, do you use pesticides?
Yeah.
The concerns are there.
Right.
Even though we've done things, there's 60 or 100 years up there, the concerns are real, and we have to address them.
Right.
But that's part of hemming what's in, is part of what makes it harder and harder to stay in business, because I have to answer that question, or I have to go and in this particular case, I'll have to go and ask for that permit so I can do this on this weekend,
Yeah.
and everything else. So you take more time away from the work that I do that I don't get paid enough for anyways. So housing
Yeah.
sometimes looks like the easiest answer out. It's, don't put roadblocks in the way that allow people to stay sustainable and keep the open space there.
Yeah, so,
When you get into an APR program,
yeah.
if you were to buy the development rights and take them off my property, then you might have some room here to have some influence on the types of events and how they're held.
Yeah, so what's, Richard, I know you're, I'm,
I was just gonna, if what Alex says is right, then this proposed bylaw is not solving a problem that anybody's gonna have. And it seems to me as though if we're wrong about that, we'll find out in due time, and then you can solve the problem. The business of the restaurants was solving a problem, the problem that there was a use that kind of needed
Yeah.
some address. This doesn't, I don't think we have that problem.
uh-huh,
I think, so this has come up. I know, having been a member of the Friends of the Sherburne Library a number of years ago, we were able to utilize the barn at Silverwood Farm for a fundraiser event. And then the year after, we thought, oh, that was so successful, and it was such a great venue, and could we do it there again? And at the time, there was a strict interpretation on whether that
Under
space
the-
could be used.
Under the building codes, and,
That was the
and
building
that,
code, yeah.
I'm not sure that this answers that question. But
Okay.
his barn up there, the building inspector said it was not suitable for general accommodation of people for meeting. But the use of that building under the current structure of that farm, using it occasionally for the library committee, should be permissible without having to go through special permits or through site review.
Yeah, as I read through the state law, which I found today and read, but I didn't get to the details about agrotourism, which thank you, sent us. Actually, the wording is, there's a little bit of vagueness in the learning.
There's a
That is,
lot of vagueness in the law, so.
In the wording, because it's not clear to what extent an event or a use of a venue would be really farm-related, but in the end, it enhances the viability of the farm operation, and that seems to be the bottom line, or enhancing the agricultural viability, or encourage the purchase of agricultural products. But I can see how having weddings, say at Silverwood Farm, would be within the state law if you want to interpret it, generously. But I think the basic problem here is, again, an abutter problem, and I think maybe we should get to that, because
If you want
there
to
is
put
an
in,
abutter
you
problem.
should put the right to farm bylaw in place, and so that makes that clearer. One of the things that, over the years, the issues that we've had to deal with is that there's people that want us to take 300 feet of our farm to create a buffer between us and the neighbor. The house on Hunting Lane is built up against the orchard, 60 feet off the property line on 25 acres, because that's the best view overlooking protected land. I'm being the victim here. I'm being the victim here because I'm being constrained to do the things that I have customarily done. And for me to be able to make changes, and for me to be able to stay current and stay viable, I have to make changes.
Sure.
And it's some of the agritourism things, and we do pick your own in one of our orchards, that's agritourism. And
Well, certainly the intent is not to make it more restrictive for things that we all commonly think of as agritourism. I think that this came up in part because we have heard stories from other towns, and other towns have been grappling with those things that are borderline, hosting conferences and hosting events such as weddings, where someone's coming because they like the aesthetics of the venue, and they're coming because they want to have their event at a farm, but they're not going out and picking crops. So I think that a lot of the activities that, certainly the pick your own and having a fair, those are clearly agritourism related, and it's trying to address, well, how do we provide some guidelines for things that are in that gray area?
So I know John wants to say something about,
let me just say one last thing.
Sure.
And, agritourism and what people come up with as a way to either generate support for their farm or generate income for their farm. The biggest drawback both farmers have is that they spend many hours sitting on a tractor thinking, and they've got good imaginations, so you'll never be able to cover every possibility but I find this, personally, is restricted. The whole section, not just the new parts, but.
I don't want to move fast from this subject here, so.
You get me before I get to the door, so.
So there's restrictions here, but one is, we said site plan review, because that way it's not a special permit. The site plan review says if you get a site plan review, you're good to go. A special permit,
You have to file for that.
yeah,
And
that's
you have
right.
to go through a process for
That's
that.
right.
Oh, yeah, I've got time for that.
Yeah, that's right. So that's a restriction, but it's less of a restriction than a special permit, which you have to renew.
But I don't need special permit.
Okay, all right, I hear you. I can't say that now.
One of the things I want to say is, one of the discussions comes up is Silverwood.
Yeah.
You know your site, and you were talking about remodeling that barn. You now have building codes, fire codes,
Right.
and people in occupation that, you know, you need to have fire alarms, you know, emergency lighting, and things like that. That's a little bit different. For Alex and myself, in our operation, you know, where people wanna be isn't where our barn is. All right, that's my backyard. And
I don't want people in my barn.
too much going on there. But, you know, I look at Jimmy Gagan, Sunshine Farm in the past, has done corn boils, you know, to get people out to promote, and has bands there. And Farm Fest we've done in the past, farm days where we encourage, those are the attitudes that we're thinking about. But it seems to be a little bit more confusion between something that Sunshine Farm gonna do, or we're gonna do, to help promote the crops that we're growing, versus using a beautiful barn up at Silverwood, or even down at Sweet Meadow. And then there's the whole other area of the fire codes, the building codes, whether that building's appropriately set up for that. I'm gonna tell you, you know, our biggest thing in our operation, talk about site plan review, we already wanna know where we're gonna put the cars, because I don't have enough parking lot, I can't get my customers in there. So we're already concerned about some of these things. And as Alex said, you know, we're gonna do something, it's gonna be down the orchard, there's no buildings down there anyways. And it's kind of an allowed use. You might bring in a tent for a special function, you know, we
Right.
hosted, American Farm Bureau, 50 presidents, of Farm Bureau were down in the orchard for an event down there, you know. We've hosted, last year, we hosted a green school for UMass, extension service, one of their educational programs and stuff like that. We're already allowed to do that. We're doing some of those things without any special permits. This law doesn't,
Right.
this doesn't do anything. Matter of fact, if anything, it's now gonna take that resident that wants to pick something, well, hey, the town bylaw says this, and he's not gonna care what the state law says. So sometimes if you put something in writing, you're gonna give that person an argument. And that's
Now
what
you
my
can pick on
concern
him and I can sit down, so.
Thank you both very much. There's another restriction in here. I thought I'd make you stay. We say the source of outdoor amplified sound must be a minimum of 100 yards from all lot lines, unless a lesser distance is approved by special permit.
I scheduled a yodeling contest on my own.
Well, I mean, the reason we put that in there as a restriction was to,
I told you I don't plan to do Woodstock.
yeah, that's what you say now. Yeah, but that was intended to say, okay, this is only gonna work on large farms, it's not gonna work on a 5-acre farm. So that was an intentional restriction to say, hey, we got a sound thing, the same sound discussion to protect the butters, that's a restriction. So, this proposed warrant article, says site plan review, so if you do allow something by the town rules, not the state, but if you allow something by the town rules, then there's restrictions on it, like sound, and the days and the times, and the distance from a lot line. Those are all restrictions that are based on the idea of saying, you need a site plan review to say, is this site okay to do these things? And if it is, then you can go do them, and if it's not, you can't do them. So that's trying to maybe, from your view, those are all restrictions.
But they're unnecessary also for most of what I've seen
Yeah.
and what goes
Right.
on. And I do
Yeah.
find that you are setting two standards. The one that people are gonna follow, the ones they see first, which is the town standards. And,
Yeah.
you know, I have not heard in my last, can't tell you how many years, I won't tell you how many years, of any farm music that's caused a problem in any neighborhood. Now, going forward, as you pile those houses up on my borderline,
Right.
there may be a problem.
Yeah.
But I still wanna be able to do what I need to do to stay in business, so the land stays there and the farm stays there.
I guess some of this is to, I don't know and maybe there's a way, and maybe there isn't. I don't know if there's a way to make this only apply for scenarios where there's a permanent structure that's on a farm with that needs to have some sort of standards in order to have.
To me, that comes down that you're offering a special permit for a special type of structure for commercial use. And I think you can condition it at that time instead of generally trying to condition it for everybody that doesn't even apply to. And you're all welcome to come down and do a site plan review of my place as long as you're picking apples.
Right. All right. Anybody else?
Hi there, I'm Jeremy Vigneault on Western Ave. And I wanted to say that over the years that I've been in Massachusetts, I started out living in Kenmore Square, where all fire trucks go through Kenmore Square regardless of where they're going. Then out to Alston Brighton, where it's nice and quiet there. Then keep farther out until I was in Newton, and then Natick for a while. And then finally, about 12 years ago, decided to buy a house in Sherburne, where I was surrounded by woods and poison ivy and ticks, where I could open my windows in the house and go to bed, have the breeze run through and not run the air conditioner. And I purchased the house specifically for that reason. My concern and opposition to making it easier to have parties at night in a residential neighborhood is obvious, right? My house has been there since the late 40s, so it's not like I was built next to a farm later. I think that most of us, when we were kids, we learned that farmers went to bed at night and agriculture stopped when the sun went down. So, yeah. So I'm a little bit concerned that a lot of this is being written to justify the expense of a very expensive barn that was built on Western Ave. I have nothing against the owners and enjoyed the CSA and so forth, but it seems as if this is being designed specifically to pay for that very expensive building. Now, I would have no issue if any one of the farms in town had an event before sunrise that especially involved hay rides and things that promoted agriculture, but this seems so specifically aimed at expanding the business zone to a party venue in a residential area. And I don't really think that matters. Now, I understand the point of it and the pressures on agricultures and so forth, but it's honestly just encroaching on residential. I mean, it's what zoning's all about, right? So obviously I'm opposed to this as written, specifically because we all know from the previous that sound restrictions are unenforceable, that it's just gonna be a pain. And I do like to go to bed before 11 o'clock, and there have been events, including some held at the Silverwood Farm, that were quite loud, hundreds of yards down the street where my house is. So it's problematic, and I think that maybe creatively saying, have whatever you want, but before the sun goes down, great. It would obviously skew the events towards farm-related and less wedding, dance, bar mitzvah related, right? But that's, I mean, it's this age-old thing, and I don't think it's unreasonable for me to ask for that. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else?
Got notes? So again, I'm Seth Malloy at 176, right next to Jeremy's house. We're all here. We should meet and have tea after. So if you Google this topic, Google farm zone weddings, you're going to find three different things. One is, how do I make my farm into a wedding venue? The second one is a bunch of advertisements for weddings. And the third one is conflict. There's been a lot of conflict all over the place. And so the first thing I say about this is you're inviting a lot of conflict into town. And I'm very sympathetic to farms. I come from a farming heritage. You know, summers I spent up in New Hampshire with my great uncle on the farm, and I love farms. I moved in across the street from a farm, and I thought that was amazing. But I didn't move it across the street from a wedding venue. And I can give you some kind of examples of the things that have been going on at Silverwood since it's been mentioned so much. There are a lot of loud events, more than weekly. They happen on the weekdays sometimes. There was one specific night when I heard someone screaming outside. And people, you know, women don't usually scream outside my house, so I went out and I drove down the road, and sure enough, there was some drunk people in the Silverwood lawn. Which is another aspect that no one's really touched on, which is drunk driving. Weddings go hand in hand with drunk driving, no matter how responsible we try to be. So I don't, so it's already a problem, and kind of following my comments on the last one, it seems like we're exacerbating an existing problem rather than helping anything. And again, I'm very sympathetic to the farmers, the pressures on farms, and I know that at least I read an article, and correct me if I'm wrong, but Sherburne has not adopted the right to farm bylaw, and that came up a few years ago, and I think Dow's was supporting that, and I also support that. So we have a community that says we won't even let the farmers kind of be protected to do the things that they actually need to do, but we want to slap on weddings here and events like that. So that seems very unreasonable and not consistent with how the residents of Sherburne have kind of spoken before I got here. I've only been here a couple of years. Another one is reducing the property of your land value. So if I'm across the street from a farm that has become a wedding venue, even if when I was looking at the house, I would have been less likely to pay for it because it's across the street from a wedding venue. And so that's another one. The right to farm also requires that you present a document to people before they buy a house, telling them that this is a community that supports right to farm. Given that this is actually allowing agricultural properties to engage in activities that are much more disruptive than right to farm activities, there's no provision here to kind of do a similar type thing when you're buying a house on Western Ave. By the way, the farm across the street is allowed to have wedding events all through the night or until 11 o'clock, which again is another thing that's unenforceable. 11 o'clock sounds nice. I don't know how many people have been to clubs or music venues at night, and almost inevitably they get out after the closing time, and especially when it's this kind of not a regular thing where you have special police for nightclubs, it'll just go to whenever they feel like it. And in my experience, even if you do complain, they will continue on anyway. And another point is that I think that it could, in the longer term, have the opposite impact that we want, which is we want to preserve our farms being here. We want to support them and make it so that they're economically viable. If I now know that there's a development that might happen and the choices are between farm and development, as an abutter, I might say I'd rather have the development now because I don't want another wedding venue next to my house. It's sad. We'll lose the open space. I'm a big supporter of open space. I'm on the open space committee, but that would be my opinion now. If someone said this other property went for sale and there's some contention about a development, I'd say I'd rather have the development than the farm because they're going to put up a really fancy barn and have wedding or just events in general, late night events and daytime events. There was some kids parties during the day that also had sound systems, rivaling clubs. I didn't understand why, but they do. And a bill was passed in January at the state level establishing an agricultural tourism study. Instead of kind of mucking with our zoning laws, why don't we wait to see what they have to say? That will take 1 year. I don't know why we're rushing to do this. And I think that's all my points.
Thank you, Seth. Other comments?
I guess the only comment I'll say is that, as it is understood that was attempting to address structures that are hosting events, and somewhat similar to the other two articles, there's some things that are already happening. So in a way, this was also an attempt to say, again, specifically the noise, that seems to be the biggest concern with the abutters. And also with traffic, the special permit would have regulations that would, if there was an evening event with alcohol, then there'd be a requirement for police detail. And there's basically trying to address things that maybe are happening and coming up with some guidelines, so.
Should they not just rezone for commercial purposes then? If that's what they want, just rezone that part of their land.
Yeah, I think, again, I don't think there's any problem with saying it should be secondary to their primary function. So rezoning doesn't solve that. And this is a zoning, but,
If there were a house anywhere in town that decided to have parties every night, all summer, for whatever reason, maybe they made a deal with their friends, they're getting something out of it, maybe not, it doesn't really matter. If the noise levels are such that the abutters are really bothered, their babies wake up, they can't sleep, it ruins their life, there should be a recourse for that. And this is more like that situation, it seems to me, than it is like any right to farm or agritourism. We don't really, you can correct me, Alex and John, we don't really need a right to farm bylaw for agricultural operations to do what they need to do. Is that correct?
That's correct, because all of the right to farm information that a town would have already exists.
It already exists at the state level. So passing a right to farm bylaw doesn't give the farms any more leeway than they already have.
In a case like his, though, it does increase public awareness of the fact that, you can
Right.
expect that this farm is here because under the right farm bylaw, someone told me.
Right. But once again, it's an abutter noise issue really here that's the stumbling block, it seems to me.
And I'll point out one thing that's different in our case than the houses is, like, our houses, as Jeremy mentioned, were built in the 40s, and I'm pretty sure that barn was built way later. So it's actually flipped. It's not that there was an existing structure that kind of warranted putting this, but then the houses started to be built in. So it's kind of the opposite. So you have both cases, so favoring one over the other.
Well, that's true in the center of town as well. The houses were there before the inn became a venue. But one could argue that you bought the house knowing that there was a farm across the street. What you didn't count on was the noise.
yeah. Richard?
So, I don't know what to think about any of this anymore, but it does seem to me as though abutters have a right to some peace and quiet, not to tell their neighbors what to do, but to mostly be left alone, especially after dark. And I think most of the Sturm und Drang here from people who aren't farmers is noise at night. And I would suggest if you're going to keep this, and I'm sympathetic with the idea of just throwing the whole thing away, I'm afraid, but if you're going to keep it, I would focus solely on keeping quiet at night. And I think I would, as a first pass, change music must cease promptly at 8 p.m. Because there's barely an event that will wish to carry into the night that will agree to 8 p.m., and that solves probably 3/4 to 90% of your problems. And while I'm sympathetic to the idea that one should have accessory activities on farms, I think it's reasonable to say that farm activities, accessory activities, should be somehow within the penumbra of what a farm does. Otherwise, you've got a conference center. And conference centers really ought to be thought of differently and regulated differently than farms. And I would suggest that focusing on noise at night might be the way to simply move past what's clearly a difficult conundrum.
Okay. Anybody else? Okay, good. Let's see. Next on our list is a large scale, to amend section 5.10 of the zoning bylaws to enable large-scale ground-mounted solar photovoltaic facilities. And specifically citing by create a zoning bylaw that will create a citing by special permit, and it has conditions. So the conditions are: no facility shall be located closer than 500 feet from any residence other than the property owner. Such facilities shall be screened from view of abutting residences and public ways, and that can be waived based on circumstances of the specific site, including topography, and that no more than 10% of such facility may be located I don't know what, Gino, I'm looking at the language.
I know, it's,
I think the idea was to say no more than 10% of the facility can be located on active farmland or wood, or, let's see, now I see our language
On
here.
land that has
Land that
been
has been
Yeah, yeah,
actively
okay.
farmed or woodland within 5 years previous
you.
to the date of application.
Thank you. So on land that has been actively farmed or has been woodland within 5 years of the date of application. So is supposed to say, that's supposed to say you can't take a lot of you can't take a lot of farmland and you can't take a lot of woodland to do that. You can't have more than 10% of the facility that would be on good farmland or good woodland. That's the idea. We did receive some feedback about the language and being more specific than certainly what I just muddled. But so the purpose is to enable a large-scale solar panel installation, ground-mounted solar panel installation, where that's not allowed now, unless it's in our already existing overlay district, which is really
the landfill.
the
site.
transfer station. Yeah, the landfill. That's the only place where we do allow it right now.
So what defines large?
Yeah.
Yes, it's in the,
I'm looking.
initial, the existing bylaw has largest defined in general as 250 kilowatts.
250 kilowatts.
Great, yeah,
How much land does that take like?
can't remember whether that.
Initially, in the Green Communities guidelines, it said that could fit on like an acre or two, but in practice, it seems to take a little bit more than that, like
Yeah.
4 or 5 acres.
Yeah,
Question, other than the landfill, what kind of land hasn't been actively farmed or a woodland in Sherburne?
well, it's actively farmed, meaning it's currently being farmed.
Within 5
In the
years.
last 5 years.
Give me an example of an area of land that meets that spec.
Most of Western Avenue.
Yeah,
I mean, all of the hay fields, that's actively farmed. within
Correct.
5 years, right? So other than someone's yard, what else do we have in town that would meet that criteria? Wouldn't everything other than the landfill be something that was either actively farmed or woodland within the last 5 years?
no, no. Sorry, I'm not following your thinking. Actively farmed means someone's driving a tractor over it now, or has done that in the last 5 years. So my yard, I live on a, I'm in residential C, 3 acre or larger, and I've got, I don't know, 80 years ago, it was actively farmed.
So your property would be fine, but all of.
No, my property, you can't do it. It's not actively, it was actively farmed, now it's active woodland right now. But it was actively farmed 80 years ago. So that's not considered that would not be included.
Looking for example of what could be included.
So,
Somebody's 2-acre yard.
Somebody's 2-acre yard. Pretty much. Or a field. Well, no, that's not necessarily.
A very large
So-
septic field.
Anybody would argue that's just a hay field and it's farm.
Well, I thought the definition of farming is you have to sell maybe else. I can't tell if you actually have to have a sale of some kind of product.
Can I speak to this?
Yes.
yeah, sorry, Richard.
So, I'm glad there is a definition of size, thank you. And it doesn't sound as though it's all that big, so in fact, people with backyards, 2-acre backyards that they mow could actually put one of these things in. That's one thing. Is that really what you intend, to allow people with 2-acre backyards to put in these things? That's one question. Second question is, I don't understand the sentence, ground-mounted solar voltaic systems whose primary purpose is to supply electricity to the grid. In fact, correct me if I'm wrong, every ground-mounted photovoltaic system supplies electricity to the grid unless you're off-grid, which nobody is. Betsy's got one, I've got one. They feed into the grid. That's what they do. That's how they're all wired. So this is a distinction. You may think that you're making something that matters, but in fact, I don't think it does. Okay. But the real objection that I have, and I do have an objection, is in Part C. I don't know why, I don't know what the thinking is behind telling someone who's got an active farm, no, you can't do that. Now, your neighbors across the street can do it. They've got a house that they're going to take down because that's just what they want to do, and they're going to put one in, but you can't do it. Why? I understand there must be some idea about preserving farmland and things like that. If you want to preserve farmland, give farmers options, give farmers better prices, give farmers lots of other things, but don't tell them they can't do something with their land other than sell it to a developer, because that's what's going to happen when they're done with it. And as far as I know, there's virtually no, well, do you mean actively farm or has been woodland? So you can't cut down your woods to put in one of these things?
You can cut down 10%.
You can what?
You can cut down 10%.
Up to 10%. But if I wanted to put in if I had an acre of woodland, I couldn't cut down that acre to put in one of these things?
Correct.
I just think that's wrong. I think you're telling people what they can and can't do with their property. And frankly, I've got an acre of red pine, which isn't doing anybody any good whatsoever. I'm not going to do this, but if I wanted to, I ought to be able to.
Well, right now you can't.
I'm sorry?
According to this, our current bylaw says you can't do that.
Well, yeah, that's worth changing, but it's not worth changing to this.
All right.
Now, let me follow up Mr. Doom and Gloom here, so, sorry, Rich, but.
Hey, you're out of order.
Well, I don't like that provision either, because if for some reason I can't afford to continue farming and I want to convert it to something else,
Yeah.
so I might do it. As well as, there are a number of programs in the Department of Energy and the Department of Ag Resources for siting solar on farms.
Right.
So here comes the problem. If I take Green Lane, which is 33 acres, take 10% of that out, put solar into it, I can't use it, because I can't get it to where I need it. So it has to be commercial. Is 3 acres enough? I don't know. We haven't looked at that too much. So I've got to sell it commercially, which means it goes out at a wholesale price, and I probably won't ever make any money out of it, so it's probably not worth it to do it unless there's a big grant that goes with it. But to say that farmland is so sacred that you can't generate resources off of it is short-sighted. And it's like Rich says, if that's what it takes to help me pay the bills on my farm, and the option is viable, and I can still raise the crops that I want, why couldn't I do it? Why are you against the agricultural part of that? Or why are you against cutting down a section of forest? You gotta remember, there wasn't a tree in this town in 1900. Could be that way again in 20 years, you never know. Nothing stays the same. So don't limit people's options when it makes good sense. And it's more about siting and in neighborhoods and everything else. The state has pushed very hard for solar, primarily in areas where they can put it on roofs on places that were already occupied. But you can go Southborough on 85 at Route 9, there's a big solar field there. Go up 495 up by Route 9, there's a bigger one. Go to the Mass Pike. Look at the Mass Pike on your way to Boston. Out the other side of Worcester, there's a solar field out there that must be 30 acres. I mean, if you limit the scope and the scale, you limit the benefit and everything else. So I'm not really sure I want to see 100 acres of solar, but I own 130 acres. 10% of that is 13 acres of solar panels.
Yeah. So the reason, if you think like a commercial business district with warehouses or something, to some people.
We got that coming?
No.
Oh, okay.
So, but there's a reason we have zoning to prevent that. And so I think some people will look at a solar, a ground-mounted solar installation and equate it to an industrial warehouse or something like that.
Well, I don't disagree with that, but, you know, but
So that's why we currently don't allow it.
You've got Robert Johnson that wants to do it on his fields up there. I mean, those are agricultural fields because somebody cuts the hay off of them. But, you know, that's what you're going to be looking at is places like that in different places around town and everything else. And, you know, it's really, I think it's up to the owner and
Yeah.
the permitting people as to whether to do that. The original solar bylaw that had the overlay district that restricted it to places like the top of the landfill really wasn't progressive as far as trying to get people to get into green energy and renewables. And I don't think this helps either. So, but I really object that when you say farmland's off limits, that I may want to see apartment buildings in there, or I may want to see solar in there, or a combination of something. And I think when that decision comes, I won't have 5 years to wait to see what happens. So, even though it may take 5 years to get the permit, so.
Oh, slam.
Sorry, you're not doing very well tonight, so.
I don't know, I think the hearing's very successful.
I can, oh, go ahead. I was just going to make a comment. I can tell you exactly where the no more than 10% of such facility be on former woodland or current woodland. The thinking there was simply that we don't want people cutting down their trees necessarily to put up solar facilities, because trees have their own climate mitigating effect. And, you know, it's a cost-benefit analysis that I haven't done, but, uh-oh, here comes Richard.
Pay them to keep their woodland. If it's a public good, and you don't want someone to cut their woods down because of it, you ought to pay them.
61A, I think it's called. I think it's called
Right.
61A.
What stops them from cutting it now?
Nothing.
So, there's nothing to stop them
No,
from
nothing.
just cutting it into
No, but on the other hand, we don't encourage people to cut down their woodlands for no reason, because the tree cover is an important part of our infrastructure, our water recycling, our climate control. You know, there's costs and benefits.
The costs are to the farmers, and the benefits are to the society as a whole. So on one hand, we're giving, and with the other hand, we're taking.
Well,
Yeah,
there's a
so-
benefit because you get a certain amount of money from a solar installation. The owner also gets a benefit.
Michael Lesser, 54 Forest Street. The existing bylaw was done in 2011. There's been various model bylaws propagated by the state and others since then, such as 2014. Now that this thing would try to expand this bylaw, it would seem like we first need to review the bylaw itself as opposed to see if it's up to date as part of any expansion, which I don't, I see it, I haven't had any time to look at it myself to see how it differs from from much more, the newer statements about how a bylaw should be done, but I think that this would, you want to first see if the bylaw itself is up to date with other towns and what the state has recommended as a model bylaw.
Yeah.
For the DOER, that should be reviewed against our current one before we expand on that.
Yeah.
That's one of them. And then also to get a legal opinion about to what extent can we restrict these things, because there is state law that there's a right to do these things that I think is different from when we did the bylaw, because I'm not sure whether we're trying to regulate something that I'm not sure whether we can regulate.
No, it's, the model, the state model just provides a lot more criteria on the regulation, but it
Right, so
absolutely
I'm not sure if
regulates
this is
it.
legal, that even what's put here to restrict it is viable against what the current.
No, it is.
It is?
Yeah.
The town council has reviewed it.
Yes, and the difference is, there's a right to use solar energy for your own use versus a commercial facility whose intent is to sell it only. That's how that first language came in, but I can see, we should make it clear, it's not, of course, all solar facilities feed into the grid. The excess that's being produced beyond what the house or farm uses, we should say something like it only sends it to the grid without any personal use or something to that effect. But that's the difference, commercial facilities. And I agree, there is some contention about that, but right now, to the best of my knowledge, the breakdown is you have a right to solar for your own use. A commercial facility is subject to regulation.
Yeah, just like any industrial zoned area.
So you don't even need that language about this upright, other than, 250, you don't just need the language, it's something that size.
One of the big, yeah.
By definition, property is not for own use.
One of the big differences between the current model and what we have is the current model creates a lot of segments of acreage and sort of detail, and we're skipping that. We're just adding large. So the state puts in a lot of steps to control the size, and we're skipping that and just saying it's got to be let's see, it says it here someplace, that you have to be 500 feet from any residence. So that from any residence, you have to be, the facility shall be located, no such facility shall be located closer than 500 feet from any residence. So that just skips a lot of the state stuff. So this is just one piece of what is referred to in the new state model.
So that only applies to a house, so that it's an existing house. But if somebody put up a new house later on that's closer to 500, they just have to live with that.
Right, and the reason here is the reason we're doing this is it's a zoning kind of thing. We're trying to be green, and we're trying to be cooperative to a large property owner or a property owner that wants to do this. But we're also trying to say, where do we want to be in 30 years? And we want to preserve our semi-rural look and feel. So we're trying to enable just large locations, just large sites, and we're trying to do it in a way that is visually screened, in distance. So we're trying to preserve the rural look and feel of the town and still enable something that's not enabled. This was brought to us by one property owner who wanted to do this on his property and said, I think I've got a great space. So that's what started this. Since then, I think there's 4 or 5 or 6 other property owners that are interested in this.
Not in response to this, just independently, they've inquired about
Yeah.
it.
I'm guessing there's some marketing going on. But that's why this is here. That's why the planning board just said, okay, let's try to put this together so that the town can decide. Yeah, so I don't think there's anything here that's in conflict with what the state is doing. It's just skipping a lot of it. We're not trying to create all these little incremental sizes in between. Yeah. To full disclosure, Michael Lesser sent it to me and made me read it. So,
A couple of things. One is that I applaud the effort. I think it's valuable to begin to expand the ability of people to put solar on their property for other than personal use. It's a good thing. But I haven't read the state regulations that you were just referencing about the various sizes and so forth, but frankly, I think that's probably a good idea. I like the idea of the visual screen, but if you've got, and I'm just thinking of some properties that I know in Sherburne where, you have really large expanses of undeveloped land that could be covered with panels. They ought to be able to do it, but on the other hand, there may be environmental reasons not to let them do it. Not because I don't like the way it looks, not because I like the idea that farmland is preserved, but because there may be consequences for water runoff, there may be consequences for other things that truly are of concern that solar developers don't really think very much about, as far as I can tell. One of them would be herbicide use around the panels, which I assume is done. I assume it's done widely, and that maybe that's harmless, maybe it's not. But that's the kind of thing I would say more belongs at this level rather than if you own this kind of land, you can't, and if you own this kind of land, you can. As much as I applaud it, I think that there probably are some limits. I'm just not sure these are the right limits. By the way, the state is, in fact, trying to also get farmers to figure out how to grow under panels. And I don't know about you, Alex, I can't think of anything to put there.
lichen.
Lichen, yeah, exactly. Yeah, right, exactly. Sheep around your panels, not goats. They'll climb up on them. But that kind of thing, I think, might be worth looking at.
So I guess my response while you're here is that I think North Carolina has a great example, and I don't know, I think you sent that. This guy's a taskmaster. But and they go into lengths about sheep and herbicides and that sort of thing. I'm fine with that. I think it belongs in the regulations, not the zoning bylaw, though. But I think those level of detail, we can talk breed of sheep too. But I think there's a lot that soil compaction. How much of the soil is disturbed just for access, for servicing and things like that. All of that stuff plays into it. And what's the impact on the soil quality?
Yeah.
So the purpose here is to say, is to come up with a way to enable it without it sort of visually having a big impact. I think that's the primary purpose here. And to me, the rest of it could be covered in regulations.
Right. So I think, I think an issue is similar to the one with the dining, where you go from 2 nights to 365 nights. I think here we're going from nowhere to absolutely any size anywhere, as long as you can jump through really a fairly small number of hoops. And that might be something to rethink. It might be worth having a system that for the next couple of years has size restrictions while you think about it, while it rolls out, while it, in fact, plays out other places as well, and then think about whether you want to expand it further later on. I think we end up thinking the problem can be solved once.
Could I add something to that? I think that I personally don't feel like I have all the data I need to make a decision on this. The reason is not just, whether you have the right or even whether trees are better than photovoltaic panels. But having been through the details of the design of the solar facility over at Odessa that we approved, now that was a perfect site. It was a parking lot. But, we saw the kind of infrastructure that you need under those panels. It's not like, panels over a field of flowers. I mean, there are cement pads, there are, posts, metal and cement posts that have to be sunk into the ground. There's a whole infrastructure on the ground and under the ground that I think we have to take into account. I mean, we gain green energy, but something is also lost. So we need to analyze that a little more carefully, I think.
By the way, that's a carport designed to have room for car carriers and fire trucks.
True.
So that's not a typical ground-mounted array.
No, but
like
if you look at
like
the
one
array,
at Sunshine Farm, where they just drive the posts in the ground.
right, or the arrays out on the pike. But still, it's not, there's a fair amount of
Yeah.
disturbance involved.
Yep.
So.
Okay.
What is the process to do? Are there regulations related to this? I'll confess ignorance that support this, and at what point will they be expanded, like some of the issues Richard brought up about, do you have any herbicide or chemical use, or do you even have chemicals for cleaning, which they'll claim that they don't. I mean, most of them actually don't. Having just seen them develop this morning, they say that they don't need any chemicals to do any other panel cleaning, but also they won't use any herbicides, but is there a set of regulations that exist to support the existing one, or at what point are you developing that?
Not specifically to this, but there are general site plan rules and regulations that would be applicable.
So
To
nothing in
this.
terms of chemical use or herbicide use,
No.
or any protection of special habitat. I read some of the state, one of the items I did see that the state was sort of talking about that there might be some regulations related to if the site is in some sort of endangered species or other kind of things, that is an issue there. I mean, the state is trying, from a policy point of view, the tariff that they're setting is oriented towards discouraging some of these ground-mounted
Right.
systems in favor of roof-mounted. So in some sense, despite all of our concerns on the supply side, from in terms of project developer side, there is policy in place to sort of take into effect the fact that they don't want a lot of land just open space thrown into solar by affecting what the
Right.
feed-in tariff is, so that they can have an incentive for roof-mounted. And I'll say that, putting on a conservation commission hat, that we have to struggle with the fact that people want to do them in buffer zones to wetlands, for example, and then there's the cutting, and then there's the shading of, cutting down trees because of the shading issue. And the trees, as Marion said, obviously have a whole host of environmental services, as the term is, beyond just sequestered carbon. So that it gets very tricky to balance those things, and we'll have to learn. I'm not sure we're going quick enough for some of them, but it'll be a learning experience to balance those things there. But yeah, I'm not sure whether how you. I guess to me, it's a matter of whether the update of the actual bylaw and the regulations are more in place before you start expanding, but in that sequence.
The prioritization the state does, saying first rooftop, second is paved areas already, in other words, already disturbed, like the carports. I think everybody knows the ones at REI. But Odessa, if you want to see a a giant one. The one over at Odessa is pretty impressive. And then the third thing is then putting things on the ground, ground mounted, and that's the reason for the limitation of trying to put some limit on actively farmed land and good woodland. That's the reason for that language. Yes.
I just ask you a quick question, Carol Mitchell, Coolidge Street. What would prevent a farmer from putting a solar array out in the field and using that field for range-free chickens, goats, sheep, and putting an agricultural use coexistent with that?
Kind of like the one in your backyard, the one over at Sunshine. Yeah,
I mean, I don't know whether they have chickens running under
I don't
it,
either.
but, and it's not
They've
that
got
big.
that one fenced off, but I mean, actually, the Department of Ag Resources is doing studies and doing promotion to try and find compatible
yeah.
uses for farmland with solar on, either by the way they build the array or the type of array.
Yeah.
But there again, it still comes down to whether you can transfer that power from where it's produced to where you need it. And if you're not connected directly and you don't have the proper power line, you're only selling it commercially because you can't afford to buy it back. These are not inexpensive things to build.
Right.
And the interconnection is next to impossible. And if I've got to move it a mile from where it's produced to where I'm going to use it, doesn't make any sense.
Yep. Yep. Further discussion? Good, thank you, everybody. Last one is open space. And this is where we have an existing open space design bylaw that is section 4.5, and it currently is to provide an alternative to sort of traditional subdivision. So a developer can come in and right now, based on our zoning, 1, 2, or 3 acre zoning, come in and lay out lots and build houses. So what we're suggesting is, in this warrant article, is to, what you can do now. Now you can on that same large lot of land, instead of doing a traditional development, you can get a special permit to build a high-density, put the houses closer together and disturb less of the total land. So instead of putting 2 acre lots, dividing up a parcel into 2 acre lots and putting one house in each lot, you can put the houses closer together and leave a larger chunk of the land undisturbed. So you can do that by special permit. So right now, you can do that now. This is just flipping that, basically, saying, make this by right. Put high-density housing, the same number of houses, on the same amount of land, but put the houses closer together and conserve the rest, the undisturbed land. So we end up with a larger chunk of land in conservation. And then it goes into a lot of detail about it, but that's the basic goal, is to make this by right, this high-density, conserve as much open space by right, and then if you want to do the traditional development, do that by special permit.
This is something that's also called clustering rather
Right.
than, I mean, this is different from the high density that people think of with the EA, and this still is essentially whatever the current zoning is, the 1, 2, 3 acre zoning, but it's just proportioning where the houses are in relation to the total amount of land a little differently, right?
Yeah, thank
And
you.
there's another change from our current open space subdivision bylaw, which requires a special permit. The density of the clustered houses in this new bylaw is not restricted. You can cluster them as densely as you like, as long as you leave 60% of the land undisturbed. So it assures more preservation of land. Whereas the existing open space bylaw that we have, open space subdivision bylaw, you can get a special permit to do a so-called open space development, but it still requires 1 acre per house. And that's not clustered enough to give a substantial amount of conserved open space.
This is also only pertaining to development of, what is it, 6 or more? What constitutes development? 6 or more houses, or?
No, it could be,
No,
it
it
could
could be any,
number.
any number.
but it wouldn't be just 1 or 2 houses. Would you have a
Most
development?
likely not, but
Conceivably,
Doesn't-
you could take, in a 2-acre zone, if you have a 4-acre lot, you could cluster the 2 houses close together and leave 3 acres vacant.
yes.
Yeah, we don't specify acreage, we took that out.
That's right.
The other, it does increase the setbacks. Someplace here, it was 10 feet, I think, between structures. So in our existing language, we changed it to, here it is. So buildings must be set back a minimum of 60 feet from the rear and side lot lines on the perimeter of the development and 100 feet from any frontage on scenic road, unless the planning board grants a lesser distance through a special permit process. So that's increasing the setbacks. So that's the key features to it. It does enable inclusionary zoning. It does enable through special permit. It does enable an incentive for affordable or subsidized housing, but it doesn't specify it. It's not required. Another aspect is that by clustering, by putting the housing closer together, the intent is to enable more low impact on the total development. So if you're putting in a roadway, the road should be shorter because the houses are closer together. Driveways should be shorter because the houses are closer together. So we're disturbing less land, so there should be an incentive for a developer, cost less if you don't have to put in so much infrastructure. Anything else?
Gist of it.
I think that's it. Thoughts?
You know my response, so. And again, I sent, a little comment on that but I do believe that, number one, is that cluster zoning should only work on much larger parcels, not a 4-acre lot in 2-acre zoning. Should be a multiple of that. But I also see an opportunity here through transferable development rights of taking and increasing density on suitable land for building and take the building rights off land that you want to keep open in private ownership. And you don't even address that. And I think that when you look at potential, and especially in agricultural land, that you've got some gems of property that you might be able to forestall seeing develop if you provide some equity back to the owner through the sale of development rights and transferring them to an area that you could have more dense housing. And I'm not sure that would work in every part of town, but there are certainly areas where I think it would work. And if you had a 5-acre piece, say, in 2-acre zoning, by buying enough development rights off a piece of open land, maybe you could put 10 houses on that 5-acre piece, or 15 houses on there, or a condo unit, or an apartment unit. But while you're developing that, you're saving the same density over the entire town, but you're taking a piece of land and you're taking the development potential off of that. And I think you can do that on a marketable basis. But I think that under this, you lose that opportunity or that potential, and I don't think that you gain that much. I think in years gone by, when developers bought a big piece of land, they develop all the houses they could and then just give the rest to conservation. They get it off the tax rolls, they get it off their taxes. And I don't think you want to create that scenario again, because right now, land taxes are pretty high. And the less you have the tax, the more it's going to cost people, and the less attractive the land or the homes are going to be. So you stagnate a little bit your growth and everything else. You're not really addressing, in many respects, you're not really addressing housing needs for people other than the people that can afford the $600, $800, $900, $1 million house, so.
Well, that point's well taken. Actually, on transfer of development rights, it turns out it is in here, and I didn't see it either,
Yeah, I'm
because
looking.
it's under,
Well, it is, I saw it in there, but it wasn't really explained or
it
exploited.
wasn't explained clearly enough. It says, open space design may be applied to non-contiguous parcels, and that's essentially what transfer of development rights is. That is the total maximum number of residential units as determined according to the requirements of
But I'm
section.
suggesting you spend some time and look at properties that would receive development rights and properties that would provide development rights. And try and
Right.
figure out how best to make that system work to advantage of both parties. And I think what you end up with, and I think the real key to it is, number one, is you end up with preserved open space that's still productive. And number two is that you create housing, you know, in places that it can be supported. But you don't change the overall density of the population of town based on what the development
Yeah.
might be.
That's right. I think that is the intent on, I think it's page 6 of the warrant articles.
It
D, open space design and non-contiguous parcels. I think we could make that clearer, Alex, because that is essentially transfer of development rights. If two parcels are available and one is great open
Yeah,
space.
but I want you to take it a step further and take those receiving parcels and consider putting in a density greater than what the zoning would allow. If you had
Yes.
that 5 acres and 3 acre zoning, that would be 1.5 houses. Why couldn't you put 10 houses in there if you preserve
You know,
5 acres or more somewhere else?
that is the intent here, and we could make it clearer, actually, indeed. You
That's
see where it
exactly
could
what
be?
it says right now.
Yeah.
If you have 5 acres here and 10 acres here, you can make the 10 acres the open space and put all the development on the 5 acres.
Yeah,
That's
all
what
of
it
the,
says right
all
now.
of the, all of the
Maybe we can
development.
clarify it more, but that
Yep.
is definitely the
Why
intent.
don't I just read that? It says,
Well, no, I'm quite clear on it. I'm just saying to you that it's really not forefront for discussion in there. It's just kind of one passage in there. And I think the potential here is much greater than just, you know, trying to squeeze everything off one corner of a piece of property, so.
Well, you're right, it's not in the forefront. The forefront is basically the idea of clustering. But maybe we could make it, you know, more obvious.
you know, we battled over different parts of this language. I'm hesitant to change the language here, but maybe add
Facilitate
something.
Maybe
by
add
breaking
something.
in, yeah, exactly, so breaking, adding in between C and D perhaps, or in E, under C, talking about shared driveways, and it kind of then transfer of development rights kind of throws in there, but maybe breaking it out into more specific sections.
Or
so
add
that-
another piece to D,
Yeah,
because D, I think, does cover it.
D covers it, but not explicitly enough. So your point's well taken, though, definitely.
That's all I had, so.
That could just expand the first sentence. You may be applied to, open space design may be applied, et cetera, by transferring all development rights to one piece of land, one of the pieces of land.
Well, you have to first say non-contiguous
parcels.
parcels. Yeah,
So, the first sentence, open space design may be applied to non-contiguous parcels by applying all development rights to one of the parcels. Isn't that what you're doing?
Yeah.
Think about that for a while. It's pretty complicated, I think, in setting a system up that makes sense. But if you really,
The words transfer.
and
development.
in my opinion, if you really want to preserve open space or preserve forests and farms and stuff, you've got a way that you can do this without costing the town a lot of money, and do it through the development process and still get the type of housing that supports what the community needs, both for the elderly, for the young, and for the people that are not CEOs of a Fortune 500 company.
Well, the point is well taken, because, and I think this bylaw is a good place to make that clear, because this bylaw says that a cluster development is by right. That means that if you do the transfer of development, the transfer of development rights within this bylaw, it's by right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I also, I just want to make very clear, though, if you have the right on a 4-acre parcel to build 2 homes, that may be possibility you put 6 homes there by buying the development rights somewhere else and having a density that's greater than the zoning allows
Right.
for the total parcel.
The limitation then is the water and sewer.
The limitations would be there anyways.
Yeah, no,
And
but I
as
mean.
well as setbacks from wetlands and a number of other things.
All that stuff, yeah,
All of
but I'm
that.
just thinking the density.
That's why I say the suitable parcels that
right.
would receive
Yeah,
it.
okay.
There's also another aspect, which is, I'm looking for it, and someone here will find it, I'm sure, is that we're trying to protect open space. We're trying to protect open space that would otherwise be developed. We're not trying to protect open space that can't be developed because it's wet or it's a cliff.
Yeah, it does say that.
It does say that, but I don't know, I can't,
Well, and that's why my suggestion is suitable land to receive,
Right.
I mean, it's got to be able to sustain a certain amount of residents or
Yeah.
families or whatever it is
Yeah.
there. If you're taking it off open space, it doesn't matter what that land is. If it's productive open space, it has a value, and you don't need to say, well, you've got
Well, if it's a swamp.
15 1-acre development lots here, but you can only have 4 of them because there's a swamp down in the back, but
But
you
we,
need to, some details in there that you
Yeah.
need to work out, but
Page 6, under D, right, the last sentence is what you're looking for. It's grayed out.
page 6.
Page 6, paragraph
Net
D.
acreage
The last
calculation.
sentence.
Provided that the separate parcel would otherwise be able to accommodate the building lots allowed.
Yeah.
So, as you're saying, so if
Yeah.
you're preserving open space, you're preserving open space that
Qual-
would
you're-
able to
it's
please
it's
support.
quality land.
Right.
yeah,
The point is,
if we're gonna transfer development rights,
yeah. You don't want to
Real
protect
development
6
rights.
acres of wetland that couldn't be developed anyway. That doesn't count.
Yeah.
I understand
That's what it
that.
says.
But if you take a 30-acre orchard up here, that every lot potentially could be developed, there's 15 lots in there, that's in 2-acre zoning. If I want to convert it down to 1-acre zoning, I would break that 30 acres up into 30 units. You want to put in 2-acre zoning, you want to put in 3 extra houses, you got to buy 2 acres off in the transfer, or if you want to put it into 1-acre zoning, it's 1 for 1, so.
yeah, and I think Framingham did this on a farm in Framingham, or at least they wrote,
Oh, well, yeah, no, he wrote that.
Special permit and-
the idea was to
Then
partition,
the town gets
I don't know if
to
the rest went to A&R,
It's a good deal.
I don't know, but the idea was to create a cluster development on one portion of the land and conserve the rest.
Well, he was
somewhere.
trying to get the industrial base to buy, in order to increase industrial base, to buy off the open space law on Eastleigh Farms over there. And everything else, but some of that is, he was already in bankruptcy, so he was
Right.
just looking for survival.
If the discussion is going for greater density, wouldn't we be better off going back and having that be a special permit? Then you could look at each individual thing every situation.
You might go down two different paths.
Yeah, and you might say, boy, we'll allow increased density because this land is very strategic for the town, where if you do it by right, then you lose control of it.
But if it's not by right, we're talking about subdivisions here.
Correct.
The land's going to be subdivided. The
Correct.
question is, how is it going to be subdivided?
But that's where you, that's
So
where
right
the
now, but-
negotiation would begin.
Well, no, right now, by right, a developer can go in and without any negotiation at all and divide 20 acres into 10 two-acre lots.
I know, but if you're looking for strategic parcels, maybe you're better off having the town have that control.
They're gonna just go with the by right because they're gonna not wanna deal with.
Yeah.
Maybe not.
So, but Chris, I think your points, I get your point. What we, the way, if the developer can choose between what's by right and what's by special permit, and they don't know what they're gonna end up with on the special permit side, then you gotta give them incentives.
That's exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
Right.
Going for greater density.
I mean,
If
you
it's
look at,
in the best interest of the
Yeah.
town.
So
if
just,
you look at the 40B question, a developer comes in under a 40B, he's looking for a certain density, give him a certain return.
Yeah.
You can circumvent the 40B on that by providing him with opportunity to have market price homes of higher density on suitable pieces of land, provided that he goes to that donor parcel and buys enough development rights to transfer over here, and that gives him the right to put in, instead of 4 houses, 6 houses, or maybe 8 houses.
Yeah.
I get that, but Chris, if we make this cluster, make this version, the proposed warrant article, by right, inside the by right, it allows us to do those negotiations. So my point is, though, the developer, and right now, we're not giving away more. If the developer is saying, hey, if this is what's by right, I cluster stuff, and I get this, it costs me less I have less infrastructure, this is I make more profit on this, then we're all set. We don't need to give them a density bonus. I don't want to give a density bonus unless we need to, you know? So this doesn't make the density bonus by right, it just says you can cluster by right, and we can negotiate a density bonus, the inclusionary, it gives us things to negotiate, but we don't need to give it away.
But you're not giving away. And don't lose sight of the fact that in that transferable program, you're really doing much greater good by preserving more productive open space that won't be built in the future. There is a trade-off in there, but I think the benefit is the town comes out ahead by keeping the same density of residents here and expanding protected open space and doing it on the market side of it. That gives me equity back if I were putting development rights into the program.
Yeah. I guess this is a great conversation. I look at it.
Gino's not doing much next week. He can work this out, so.
That's not what he told me.
No, I know that's not what.
But I actually, the way I look at it, it's doable here. It's not featured the way you would like. I think this is a step, and I could see a more specific transfer of development rights as a whole separate thing in a way.
The concept of transfer of development rights isn't limited to this subdivision bylaw.
I understand.
It has
I mean, it's
even
just-
wider uses.
To me, the opportunity
Yeah.
here benefits the town more than what you've got right there.
Well, this benefits the town, but you could benefit the town by using transfer of development rights in other situations as well, probably, right? I mean, this benefits the town in terms of reducing sprawl subdivisions.
But you don't, because you're using the same amount of land and you're tying it up. So, I mean,
Well,
it's a
no,
misnomer
no.
to think that you're stopping
You're
sprawl.
not tying it up, you're tying up a smaller percentage of the land because 60% is preserved open space.
Yeah. I almost think they're almost two different things.
Well, it is two different things, and to me, 2 acres here and 3 acres here of open space. Now, granted, they're not houses in there, but you've got the same number of houses if it would have been, but it's not really productive to anybody.
Well,
It's just, it's just a section of land that won't be built upon for the benefit of the people that are right there.
Alex is almost describing a situation in which the town has a piece of land that it desperately wants to protect, and it gets the money to protect it by allowing developers to, it's the focus.
It's a little different.
However, whatever words you describe, it's where you're starting and what your goal is. And his goal is in a sense, better for the town. It may not be good, I don't know if you could do something like that, but.
Well, they're two different things. I mean, maybe they're both good in two different situations, I would say. Because the cluster subdivision zoning, I think, is particularly good when you have a relatively largish piece of land.
Yes, it works best for that.
And if you can preserve, say, the 60% that abuts town forest, or that is an important wildlife corridor, or that's, important for, not productive in the agricultural sense, but productive
I think the
in terms-
wildlife should stay where it is. It doesn't need a corridor, so.
Okay.
All right.
I'm
There's
sorry I mentioned
too many
it, but-
deer walking around and through the woods, so.
You're not biased on that, are you?
Well, we want to make more room
I
for
spent a lot
that
of money to
bear.
keep them out of an orchard, and I tell you, I look at them every day looking through the fence, so.
You built a wall.
I built a wall.
You and Trump,
Yep, and Donald Trump didn't get the Mexicans to pay for it either, so.
did you get the deer to pay for it?
No, the state
All right, we're
money
getting,
dried up on that, so.
all right. Alex, I got it. I guess,
I'm gonna leave now. I mean, I've wrecked your whole night.
no, you haven't. You made really good points. This is our last,
I'm struck by the fact that this conversation should have taken place 2 months ago.
Yes.
And that it shouldn't wait till the end, that there's too much that is gained from talking to Sherburne citizens about topics they may know more about than we do.
Well, I
yeah.
agree it was useful. As I recall, we were kind of busy 2 months ago.
No, I'm not,
What was
Marion,
that? Yeah.
it's, but you just have to sort of at least acknowledge that and work towards it.
I totally agree.
yeah, that's well said. I also think we're getting a lot out of this, so,
Oh, great, but I mean, it would have been,
Yeah. Yep.
what we're getting out of it is a major rewrite.
Not really. I actually, while we're talking about this one right now, I actually
Oh, not this
disagree.
one,
I
the
think,
others.
I think on the open space warrant article,
That one is
I
fine.
leave it, I hear what Alex is saying, and I think we come back next year with a transfer of development right.
No, I meant the
a
other
separate
ones.
one.
I meant the other articles.
Yep.
They seem to be.
Well,
I heard the voice of absolute reason.
yes.
When I heard someone say that the changes should be done more gradually, that there's a tendency in the other articles to sort of go from one situation to one over
Yep.
here.
Yep.
And so I hope that we
My view has flipped a great deal just listening to
Yep.
take that
conversations.
seriously.
Yep.
Well, on that note, then, let's go through the articles, and are we prepared to make some decisions? We can continue the hearing, or we can make some decisions now. If we make decisions now, then we can report to advisories rescheduled hearing next week. What say you?
I mean, there certainly were some, I mean, I keep going to, well, the first article, was there really any significant
There was
discussion?
just number 8 could use a couple of word changes,
Apartment,
yeah.
accessory apartment.
And, yeah,
Oh,
yeah.
and to any single party, such unit may not, number 8 on the first page.
Correct.
Yeah, for less than 30 days, yeah.
May not be rented for a period of less than 30 days to a single renter or party.
Yeah, I mean, Article A, for the most part, is fairly sound.
Yes,
and there's a
Thank
little,
you.
and there's a little wordsmithing.
Thank you.
Yeah,
There's
yeah.
a little wordsmithing, but I think
it came
that
off
one should
sound.
go forward
Okay.
with,
Right now, we're deciding if we're going to make a decision tonight. So let's move on to the next one. And I don't mean to interrupt you, Chris. I just
you're not
mean,
interrupting.
just, we're not voting on them yet. We're just trying to decide.
Do we have to vote on them as a package? No.
No?
No, we vote on all five.
Sounds like we're okay on, to make a decision on A. So in Article B, outdoor entertainment,
Two things.
there were a few things said, as I
One,
recall.
yeah, just a few. I think that it is a valid criticism that you don't go from 1 or 2 events a year to 365 days a year. I think there should be a limit. And the limit we have to decide on, I tend towards nothing more than 1 or 2 per week. I
don't know,
think that's such an expansion
I
of
hate-
what they have.
Except for that, I worry that by saying a 1 or 2 per week, that you have a venue, I mean, so May and June are your graduations, and you're all of a sudden saying, okay, you're only gonna allow one, you know, whoever,
The other part of it
what about,
is that I would think about the music idea and say that during the day or however we want to say it in the evening, if it's indoors with the windows closed, I don't know quite how to say this. Amplification is the issue, and the idea of having amplified music coming from across the street or down the block every night of the week is not appropriate for Sherburne. It just isn't.
Well, there's, to me, there were sort of 3 things. One, you
Yeah.
just, I agree completely. It seems like a big jump.
Yeah.
The opponents made that point. The next one is enforcement is a real
Yes.
problem. It's an
Yeah.
existing problem.
Yeah.
So it's
And
pretty hard.
penalties.
It's pretty hard.
Yeah.
Yeah, the enforcement penalty issue. If there's problems now, I'd sure like to hear from the other side, kind of. But, so there's investigation to me that, we've heard there's complaints, and there's concern there's no, clear, effective enforcement or penalty, so I get that.
Hear from the police about what,
Yeah, so we could ask the police, how many complaints do you get? We can ask the Heritage, they were the ones that were cited. But this applies to others.
You could ask
What
the
about-
police, how can we write this to help them enforce?
how would you?
but also what about, just kind of thinking commonsensically, would like Monday through Thursday, you know, maybe it's 8 o'clock, sound ceases or something,
I
or.
think-
I
think-
don't,
I think it's
I
way
don't know
too-
why we have to go from
Because it
almost
was-
there barring it to moving it to every night.
I guess because it's not just, this is not pertaining to just nighttime, and it really, and because now by moving it to the business general, we're talking about other things that may go on in midweek in this, you know, I'm thinking summer most likely. I mean, most people in the winter kind of hibernate. But if we were having, I mean, I guess I don't know too many, just, we don't have a very large business general district, but supposing the land at 41, or
How about unamplified music?
Well, I mean,
unamplified.
I like data, so why not just change it to 40 decibel?
Yeah.
If
How about
conversation is
just-
60 decibels, then
That's right.
It's the amplifiers.
Yeah, no, so you measure it. I
Yeah.
mean, the proponent that came to us in favor of this
Yeah.
said, hey, the bands and the entertainment people have these meters
Yeah.
to get it suitable for their customers. So that led us to, I think Addie Mae did most of the research, but to come up with examples, and then I found that it's done all over the country, the same issue. What a surprise.
I'm sure it is.
Some places actually say if you have high background noise, you can be louder. Makes sense.
Sure.
So,
At night, you don't have high background.
No, and
noise
so in
the
Sherburne,
town center.
we have traffic and then it gets quieter. But, so we don't need to, I don't think we need to go to that granularity kind of, but we could just specify it's gotta be quieter. Or we could say at sundown, it's gotta be quieter outside. But, and we could specify it in decibel, then we have to deal with the enforcement and that stuff, which doesn't really sound that difficult. If the proponent wants this, if the businesses want this, then they gotta
Come around.
They gotta figure out how to,
But Chris is right, ask the police how it could be best be enforced.
And then, okay, so then we're back to the question of how many, the concern that it's 365 days a year. So to me, it does seem reasonable to say Monday through Thursday, there's a different level of allowable. And I guess what the question is, what the level is. I mean, to me, it makes sense that kind of a Friday night and a Saturday night, there's a higher tolerance for things to be happening and activities that, people are not, I mean, some people are, not everybody's on a Monday through Friday work schedule, but still,
I mean, picking up on what Grace said about amplification or not, it's true, it should be just data, is it loud or not? But in general, just common sense, we could maybe make their lives easier by saying, outdoor acoustic music is okay as long as it's, not above a certain level. Outdoor amplified music maybe is not okay. Because there's no question that amplification really, it changes the quality of the sound as well as the level of the sound. And it's very hard to have amplified music that's not too loud. It just ain't gonna happen.
Well, that's the point of it.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, but on the other hand, I should think they should be able to have an event every night if they have an acoustic guitar and a cello.
Exactly.
Or a harp and a flute.
Yeah,
I mean,
yes, I totally agree with you. I don't think that is a problem. If they want to have live performers without amplification, it probably could be unlimited without providing a problem.
unless it's a big, unless it's
Well,
the big
not a
band
10-piece
sound.
band, but.
Yeah. So I think we have to negotiate a little bit with the Heritage to figure out, what's viable, what can they get away with?
They have a jazz night. They do that inside.
Right.
Is that a problem? They do that on Thursday nights, don't they? Wednesday, Thursday, something.
Tuesdays, usually. The thing is it sounds, I mean, this is where I guess we do need to find out what the police are really hearing, and.
But they've been doing that for years. No one's ever said anything.
But according to our audience this evening.
I don't think that's what they were talking about.
Okay.
no, I think it was mostly,
The
I
outside
think it
and
was,
the amplified
it
music.
was, yeah, I think they were concerned about, they didn't like the Brewfest, but it's only one night,
Yeah,
and
that's all.
then they said they have had some outdoor events already. So, and they've complained a lot. So I think we gotta do some investigation before we can feel comfortable. So we can continue this, Article B?
I think we need to continue it. I don't think we have it worked
But
out
can,
yet.
we can also just say, not this year.
Yeah.
Because I'd like to be able to report something to advisory. We can continue it, but we have to continue it to, I don't know when, next Tuesday? I don't know, we have to post it.
And we,
Rather than say not next year,
yeah.
I'd like to be able to give the Heritage some leeway within, say this is, let's try this out and see how it works. For example, only acoustic music. And if it's a large group of acoustic music, it has to fulfill the decibel limit, or either way.
But do we know if that's
Well,
something
but
that
they're
they're
making
even
this as-
interested in?
I don't know.
That's my concern, I guess, is if
Yeah,
we
well,
can
let's
give them
find-
something they don't even want.
Right.
But let's just find out.
Yeah, so,
Yeah.
sounds like we're gonna continue this.
Okay, but
In
now we
which
have
case
a-
we have to decide
I don't
when.
want to withdraw it or leave it till next year. Let's try to do something, but continue it.
Okay, so are we saying acoustic though for like Mondays through Thursday? Because all of a sudden now, if we've said this is for the business general district, and also then we do have right now, there's 2 events that are allowed. Are we taking amplified music off the table? Because in which case then that affects the Brewfest and any
Right. I mean,
bands really. Most bands are
How
going to.
about once a month for an amplified outdoor for this year? That would solve the immediate problem.
Then
of the
are we
Brewfest.
making them have a schedule where we have to keep track of that schedule, and
I don't know.
acoustic can be
Yeah.
amplified?
Yeah,
Oh, sure, of
Technically,
course.
we should
No
say
ampli-
non-amplified or
Non-amplified,
amplified.
you're right, Rick.
It's-
Yeah.
Non-amplified.
Right.
I would be curious if one piece of information is what exactly is the jazz nights, and has there ever been a problem for that? I'm sorry I didn't think of it earlier, because we could have asked people.
I think they're always inside.
Yeah, so we could
But it's
live, we
inside and
could
it's-
restrict the days, we could say amplified only daytime.
No, I
And
think they need some Saturday nights, I can understand that.
so we need to continue the hearing to find out.
Yeah, yeah.
All right, so now we,
Would we continue the hearing to?
so advisory is meeting next Wednesday. We could continue to the 13th, Tuesday, the 13th. Gino, you may not be available.
Right.
Otherwise, we just tell advisory, and they'll say, I imagine they'll say, I'd be surprised if they voted in favor of it to support it. They might just say no action.
Tuesday, the 13th.
13th, Gino won't be here, but we could continue to the 13th. We got to do some work between now and then. We could also, what do we say, we moved our second meeting this month to the 21st, is that correct?
We did that because of a charrette thing, but now we're not doing the charrette,
Right.
so.
I
Oh,
won't,
that's
I won't
Well,
be,
you're not there.
I won't be there, but
Well, we
make
could
the
still
meeting go
move it the
faster.
21st. You could be there the 21st?
yes.
Well, then we should move it to the 21st. Definitely.
Wait, instead of the 13th? But then we're not able to
Right.
have a complete information for advisory.
Oh, right.
Yeah,
Okay.
so if we want to report to advisory,
Advisory you're talking about the meeting that was on the 7th?
It's the
correct. It's now going to be the
It's the
14th.
14th,
That's right. So we could meet on the 13th
and then
and still
ready for the 14th.
get ready for them. We got to do
Yeah.
some work between now and then.
Yeah.
Or we could meet on the 21st in advisory. Advisory's not, that's not their hearing, that's their
Right, that's
discussion.
just explanation of the articles.
Yeah,
And then the
so-
hearing is later after that.
I'd say let's do
Maybe
the,
21st.
let's do the
because we need
21st,
Not the
Time to get
13th?
this clearer.
not the 13th, because I don't,
I'll be ready then.
yeah. All right, so we're going to continue,
Wednesday, the 21st,
yeah.
but the charrette is off.
As far as I know, the shred is off. For now.
Okay.
Okay.
Onward.
Onward to farm event. No,
Just-
sorry.
Just to be fully clear, it's the 21st at 7 o'clock. The hearing is continued to the 21st at 7 o'clock.
Yeah, I think we have to finish going through, then,
Oh, okay.
yeah. So, Article C, agriculture.
I thought that was very interesting, what Alex described about the breadth of the events that he can legally do.
The thing is it sounds like, I mean, it's just, as Seth did point out, you Google it, and there are the town of Holden, there's plenty of towns that that farms are running into issues with, and some of it, yes, is abutters complaining, and because they don't like the traffic and they don't like the noise, so.
But you can't really blame people in residential neighborhoods. Because I thought that the observation that this is creating spot commercial zoning in a residential neighborhood is exactly what we're doing.
No, in a sense, any farm stand could be called that, but this is a little different. I mean,
Well, it is because it's not a farm stand.
Well, the characterization is the definition of secondary, right? Is it secondary to the primary purpose, the agricultural purpose? And the spot zoning says, hey, you build a barn or you convert a barn so its full function is to host, conferences and weddings. And Alex was mentioning this one in Topsfield I'm familiar with, where it had been a very large farm, and then they partitioned and sold off, and then donated the barn and the 5 acres in the house to the town. The town sold it to a farmer who's farming 5 acres and has a big barn. So, well, what am I gonna do? I'm gonna host wedding events and grow herbs. And so the profit on the agricultural crop was probably somewhere near $100 a month, or maybe a week. But the weddings and the other stuff, so it was not secondary. It was, the poor guy who bought it invested a lot, did a lot of things, widened the road, he did all kinds of things, widened his driveway, did lots of stuff, and then they said, I don't think you can do, we don't like this, because it's not secondary, it's your primary business.
Is the Silverwood issue, which got bandied around
Yeah.
tonight, is that truly secondary? Because they were
Yes.
talking about the amount of money that has to go into that barn. They obviously knew the barn.
Yeah.
You verified that the barn was not able to pass muster now legally for large events.
Correct. And
So if they start pouring money into a barn to make it able to have
Right.
these events, fire code, building code, all the rest, parking lots, is it secondary to the farm at that point?
It's a pretty, their agricultural business is pretty extensive. They've gone wholesale, they've really,
I don't know anything about the
Yeah.
property, so it's a valid question.
yeah, it is.
To which I do
And I
not
guess
know
this is
the
where
answer.
the challenge is, I guess that, just because farming doesn't yield as much money as, do we penalize because the potatoes don't bring in as much income as an event? It's like,
But he sat here, he is planning to put money and perhaps more money into the structure than he ever admitted that night. We never asked.
Well, how are you measuring what secondary and primary? Is
Right.
it revenue? Is it time spent working on it? Is it
Right.
Yeah.
land dedicated to it?
How to define it.
Agro-tourism, the state rules, which laws which Alex was citing, say no matter what, whatever event you host has got to be promoting agriculture.
Yep.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's weddings, somehow you've got to say, I'm serving strawberries that I grew, or I'm letting people look at a tractor.
but Alex would say that no, at least his definition tonight was more broad, that because you're hosting it at a farm, and that's the farm is the setting, that's your promotion in of itself.
Right.
I think it's hard to resolve this, but let's give him that it would be covered under state law as agro-tourism or agro-event. The real issue here is the abutters and the noise. So whether we call it agro-tourism or not, we have to resolve that issue.
Yes. Right, Marion.
and traffic.
And traffic, yeah.
Well, I
Western
guess,
Mass,
but,
tough
so
enough.
then if we're just focusing on those issues, I guess there's separate issues in a way, because if you ask Alex and John, it sounds like they don't want to have something where the town is adding restrictions to
Is regulated.
an event
Yeah.
that's, because whether it's a corn maze or a apple picking, and there's, restrictions on traffic and those sorts of things, and they have to get a special permit, Whereas the intent was, we were thinking of if someone has a structure on their farm and they were interested in actually upgrading it and putting in investment in to make it suitable for a larger crowd to have an event, then how do you put guidelines in place? I feel like it's two, we've got kind of different.
Well, that's actually, there you go, that's yin and yang. That's Alex saying, don't add the requirement. I can do this now, so don't add a requirement that I gotta go get a permit now when I didn't have to get a permit yesterday. Versus, we've also got complaints about some farming activities that are getting out of hand that seem to be way outside the boundaries and are unfair to the abutters. So this would add some controls to protect the abutters for one farm, and for another it would.
So I don't, what I didn't get, I agree with that. It's good to add some controls, because we need controls now, even if they're not having weddings, they're having so many parties. But exactly what those controls should be and what the right decibel level is for that location, I'm not sure.
I'm profoundly sympathetic to someone who bought a house near a farm and discovered that the farm could have large parties regularly. And I wonder what would happen if you brought it neutrally to town meeting, whether the people would end up sympathizing with the abutters or whether they would sympathize with the farm folk.
With most
I
of
guess
these,
it's also though, I'm sympathetic in that but I also know so many people who have benefited from being able to congregate there and have functions there and things like, and there's such a need for having a facility.
But you can have functions up until the moment that you start making a business out of it and charge money. I mean, SOS has a big party every year in Bob Delaney's barn. You know, it's a great barn.
But the point is, the farm wants to charge money because it's part of their sustainability.
Yeah.
And that's okay too, I'm all for that. But the problem is, how do we make rules that limit the amount of noise and the time that the noise can be that loud?
And as I
really
say all the
comes down to
time,
the noise.
and protecting the abutters.
Protecting the abutters.
You know, we're
yeah.
trying to be fair. People move here for certain things, and as much as I support that farm, that barn was never built to be used as a barn.
It was built to be used for a fence.
Mhm.
It purposefully built to be.
It appears that way, and so.
It's certainly
So
designed
then
that
So
way.
that,
How do we address the situation where someone like the apple orchards that are not necessarily interested in hosting weddings and having bands, but are having conferences that they can have by right at the moment, if we start, how do we make it so that our language then doesn't cause more harm?
Cut out the amplified music.
well, that's actually protecting abutters, and it's not restricting. There's a great farm, it's in, there's one in Northborough, there's in Concord, in West Concord, it's called Verrill Farm.
Yes.
And they had a big old barn. Verrill Farm is a very active farmer. The owner, Verrill, all he wants to do is drive a tractor. He didn't care about anything else. So he's a real farm. It's actively farmed. It burned down, and he rebuilt, and he rebuilt it so that it's much more accommodating to events, and it's fabulously successful. It sells lots of stuff.
It's surrounded mostly by open fields.
Exactly. It's surrounded all by open field. I actually know one of the abutters. That's why I know so much about it. And that's where 100 yards from all lot lines,
Right.
that's Verrill Farm.
But you know, the houses that we heard from tonight are all over 100 yards. in fact, I was surprised going by. I know both those families. Their houses are not directly across from Silverwood Farm.
Yeah.
They're a ways down,
Yeah.
down Western. I thought, whoa, they're that far apart, and yet the noise is driving them nuts.
Yeah.
And I was wondering, there are a couple of houses that are indeed directly across the street. We haven't heard from them, but.
Yeah, so right now, it's his own his own property. All the butters can do is the same thing we all do if our neighbor's too loud. Call them and then call the police.
Right, they've done that though, and there've been, according to the abutters, a lot of events there. It's not like
Yeah.
just once.
So I did talk to another abutter who lives right across the street who said, likes the farm.
Okay. So,
Might be as deaf as I am, but
so
But
then the question
he didn't
is,
have- he was-
what do we do?
concerned about traffic, but
Well, this whole conversation is because they don't want to go the special permit route because of the substantial amount of money that would have to be put in the structure.
Right.
And it's too big of a gamble financially to bring it up to code and then maybe have a butters complain and then not get the special permit renewed. Correct? Am I remembering it right?
Well, the conversation is because, not just a special permit, but right now, it's been interpreted that you can't, that weddings do not constitute weddings, and renting out your space for fundraisers and weddings and things that are not you can't, that was the question of trying to figure out what is agritourism. That was where we started, I thought, not just a special
But-
permit versus non-special permit, but saying that right now, we're saying that within farms, weddings don't count as something you can do. And that's where there's this gray area.
According to the state law, it could be, weddings could count,
Right.
really. I mean, any event could count if it's
Under
on
the
farm.
state law?
Yeah,
Okay. So
really.
that's
You could
important.
interpret this.
That's important. What we're saying then is that they don't need permission.
Well, so Gino, let me ask you, earlier in this hearing, I said that I was under the impression that the state law does not overrule local law all the time. There are occasions when local laws apply. On a specific case by, I don't want to say case by case basis, but local laws sometimes have been held up.
So
And-
local restriction, does it override the state giving them permission? Is that what you're wondering?
Yeah, well, can local laws override the state law?
Yeah. In this instance, it's agricultural law, is it? What is it? What law is it?
It's,
Yeah.
it's chapter 40, what is it, Gino, chapter 40, section 3.
48, section 3,
48, section
that's the agricultural exemption from zoning in state law. There are other sections of state law that have agricultural exemptions as well.
So if there's a state exemption granted, can the town pass a law and say, oh, no, not here?
No.
Okay.
No, and, that's not the question, anyway. The question is controlling noise for the abutters, whether or
Well,
not
can we
it's
control
allowed.
noise from the abutters if we can't prevent the event?
And-
Do
and
we
the-
have the right to restrict it?
Well,
So if it's not really an agricultural event, then the local laws apply.
Right.
And then if it's not secondary, the local laws can apply.
And then the language there seems to suggest that the weddings do apply, do fit,
If it's not secondary.
if it's not second.
Right, but even if it is okay by the agricultural laws, the bylaws, and the state laws, we still have an abutter problem. And I come back to that because that's really the problem.
Yeah.
Well, then are we saying we want to institute a town-wide noise restriction? That's the only way you can address that, really, is a town-wide, and then is everybody gonna
Well, the environmental stuff gets to be pretty exciting. I think we've got some more visioning to do in the general plan, because dark skies fits in with that. There's a lot of, a townwide speed limit of 25 miles an hour. There's a lot of things that can go into sort of environmental laws like that. I guess,
What about the idea of the building structure? Is there, it's kind of, the scenarios that we were thinking in our mind that this would apply to really does apply. We're considering spaces that might invest in a structure. So then does that fall into another category that should be addressed, other than just farm? Is there what is it, or is it outside of our jurisdiction? Is it building inspectors? Where does it fit?
well, I think, in this case, I think we're talking about agriculture. So with agriculture, with Silverwood, is that barn, however it was built, is it gonna be repurposed so that it's not really agriculture? It's really hosting, it's really the
Does it
primary business of that structure.
Does it matter if the structure has a function, if a percentage of that structure still is storing crops and it has a certain amount of land that still is primarily farmland and is farmed? Does it matter then what that structure's purpose is?
Yeah, so now we're talking about something that could be in our local stuff, because the scenario is you partition off the barn and the parking in the driveway, because the barn's not really used it was used for retail, and I don't know, maybe they do a little packaging there, but they're not storing, as far as, I don't know their operations that well, but I don't think they're really, I don't think the equipment's stored there, I don't think it's, I don't know. I don't know enough to say that, but, if the event is changing, if the use is changing it, so it's really the primary purpose is events, not farming, then
But
we
then
could add that delineation.
But do we classify a farm based on how many, I guess, I thought a farm was classified based on what's being produced there. And so does it matter if there's one building, two buildings, three buildings on it, as long as a certain amount of
Yeah.
No, it's still a
production
farm.
is happening?
It's good, it's a farm, you know.
So, so then does it, I feel like we're coming around to then there's, to a degree, there's no need for this specified accessory, addition, because it's already allowed by the state law. And therefore, unless we're applying I don't see a place where we have a regulation.
So, Gino, I think this is a town council question. So we're gonna continue this one.
Yeah.
Because I think it's a town council question, because we've come down to we really need to know,
What is the jurisdiction?
yeah.
But either way, we also have to deal with the noise and abutter question,
Well,
which isn't addressed at all in the agricultural laws, bylaws of the town.
But then you're
or
starting
the
to tell
state.
every farm, then.
No, actually, we're telling.
Everybody. then
Actually,
But there is something in
something about noise
general
in
about
farms?
it's section 1. We address it,
What
just
does
like
it
we
say?
address it for,
Yeah.
um,
What does it say in?
yeah. It says noise, vibration, concussion,
Oh,
odors,
okay.
fumes, electronic interference.
Noxious
Um,
thing, is that it? If they're noxious, if they're.
It doesn't specifically
Okay.
say that, but it has so smoke, excessive drawdown of groundwater, lighting, la, la, la. So, but detrimental to the neighborhood, health, safety, et cetera. That's the whole town. So that's what applies.
They have grounds for turning to the town and saying, this barn with its loud noise
Right.
and regularly, constantly, is detrimental to the neighborhood.
Right.
Which is a residential neighborhood.
Yeah, but you can complain about a party.
Yeah.
That's right. I mean, the reason it's coming up with this particular farm is that they have a lot of events there.
Yeah.
And if it were a
People
house
are-
in a neighborhood that had a party,
Yeah.
3 days a week, that they would have the
Complain
same
too.
problem. So,
Okay, so I think
B
we're
and C
going to
are
ask a
being
basic
continued to
question
the
to town
21st.
council. Sorry?
So B and C, we've decided we're continuing to the 21st,
Yeah.
waiting further clarification.
Whoever knew, to quote a man, whoever knew that legislating parties was so difficult.
Yeah, I'm surprised. It's the first time. Article D, solar.
That had much less negative.
but it had, they brought up a lot of issues.
I do
that think
agree
are
with,
not yet resolved.
But they weren't really opposed to it.
I do agree with C seems unfair to the farmer because we're not telling every landowner if a landowner has 5 acres that
You can't cut down his.
that they can't cut down their trees.
Yeah, it did sort of, what got weird is, if you think about Robert Johnson, because he came in here and talked to us, but he's got land that's hayed,
Yeah.
and he's got woods. That's what he's got. So some of it's more meadow than woods, but that's actively farmed. So there's nothing in between here. There's nothing, so he can't do this,
Which is wrong, I think.
which isn't the intent at all.
Yeah.
Well, I think we have to continue this one too.
Ugh.
Do we need to continue? Okay, I mean, I guess we can. We're going to pretty much anyway. It just seemed like it seemed like the greatest objection was section C, and then the only other, there was some discussion on, well, what exactly did the state say, and, do we want to put some of the state's language in here regarding size, even though it's in the state system, so that it's
Yeah.
more clear, or more specifically
I'll tell you,
referenced?
the state thing is about 5 pages.
Okay.
So I could put all that in regulations and be comfortable. But I think we're gonna, trying to get 5 pages of zoning language in a hurry to this town meeting is not gonna happen.
Yeah.
And by the way, when I went all the way through it, it came down to, the state one is a whole, it's how do you put solar in your town? From, one panel on my roof to
Solar farm.
Odessa.
Okay.
So when I look at what we're trying to accomplish here, in the end, I think we are accomplishing the same thing as the state one. This is okay language. But it does add stuff about herbicides and soil compaction and,
Is there some possibility of referencing it? The
yeah, no,
state?
we can put it all in a regulation
Yeah,
that doesn't have to be in the zoning bylaw.
right.
So,
But here,
But then
can we
have to
say,
ref-
like,
we
we're
have to
citing?
refer to the regulation.
Yeah,
Is
yeah.
that section 5.10.4? Is that, no?
no, those are
Okay,
bylaws.
so we have to make
Local.
reference to the
We
regulation.
just make
Yeah.
a reference to that this would fall under this, must abide by the
Yeah.
state regulations.
So we'll continue it. I can send you the state version. The one I really liked was the one Michael sent from North Carolina. Okay,
But you-
so
you
that
just-
one's gonna be continued then. But in the end, are we, the abutters, well, the objection was, it's putting restriction on farmers.
Right.
If I wanna do this, I wanna do this.
I didn't hear any restriction against the 500 feet from residents.
No.
And I didn't hear, it was really the only, the objection was, there was something about, the language on, the electric grid, because the idea that everything is supplying to the grid.
Right, the language here, I'm not sure the state one's better, but the language here is to supply electricity to the grid, meaning commercial. But it could be commercial use on site, like Sunshine. So I'm sure there's better language, I don't know what it is. It's probably to say it's for the sale of electricity to the grid.
Right.
Well, it already says primary purpose.
Right.
So what if we said primary purpose to supply electricity to the grid rather than use on site? Does that clarify that?
Sure. Right, which means if you have a big operation and you want to use a lot of electricity, then if you're making lithium, then you can use it all yourself.
So as far as Article D, we'll wait, you're gonna,
So Gina, we can make that change.
Is there any
So-
possibility of doing away with C?
yeah, I would suggest we remove C.
No, let me work on that. I'll pull out the pieces out of the state language, because the state is trying to do exactly the same thing.
They are,
The
okay.
state prioritizes first, you could do, see, these are all by permit, right? So you can turn down a permit that's perfectly good, except we got enough of them. You know what, we did one this year, that's enough. You can turn down a permit for anything. So the state wants you to be able to do that, because the state says, prioritize, first do rooftop, then do paved, disturbed land already, and then if you got to, then do land, and if you're gonna do land, don't put it on top of good farmland, and don't cut down a whole bunch of trees. The state says the same thing we're doing.
Okay, and
So what's the
and
problem then with-
what I heard back was we are so concerned about the viability of farms, which we are,
Yeah,
and yet you're restricting me.
and that's right. We're also restricting the farm from
So,
putting a parking lot because they can sell parking spaces. Sorry, you can't do that. We restrict farms you can't do a lot of things on farms.
okay. We'll help you we'll help you the way we want to help you. And
That's
not
right.
help
Yeah,
you
yeah,
the way
yeah.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay. You're right.
Right, so, I mean, I think we have to have something about those different levels of, that the state describes, because I think the environmental impacts of large photovoltaic facilities, I can't say that word, on some lands could be serious, and as Michael said, we don't know some of the long-term consequences.
Maybe
So-
the way to do it is to list the state's list and use that as the basis for permitting or not permitting in town.
yeah.
Right,
If
things that
someone-
would be under consideration.
Right, so someone who's got wasteland gets greater priority for a permit than someone who is trying to take their best land and do it. Link the two
Yeah.
things.
Yeah,
Something like
an old gravel pit versus
Yeah,
a.
because
yeah.
you said that they have the right to limit, so,
Right.
I mean, it is a little arbitrary, but at least there's some reason behind it. There's a better spot for this in Sherburne, don't.
Well, I was actually surprised that the people that were against C didn't understand
Right.
the value of having C in there. I was surprised.
Right.
Yeah,
I think they were just feeling prickly that farmers don't like to be told what to do.
Yeah,
yeah, I thought that's where
Yeah,
Richard was
that's
coming
probably
from.
part of it.
But I'm not sure if we can figure out some way to put language to that effect in that's a little bit,
promote weddings on solar panels.
you better make it
Light up your life.
solar panels.
All right, so I'll send you the state model and and highlight the part about differentiating land.
And who would be permitting these things? Would that be us, or?
Well, our language here is the planning board, yeah. Okay. Open space. that one flew through.
That was not a problem.
And I do think Alex's point is fine, and I just think transfer of development rights is a different ballgame. So.
Yeah, this is a great step towards it without
Right.
complicating it, because it's a very complicated subject. To do the full-blown TDR like he's talking about, you have to set up zones, receiving zones, donor zones, and it would never, I don't think it would ever fly, because people would, but this kind of gets people used to the idea that
That's
maybe
right.
later on it could be adopted.
Yeah,
All right,
that's right.
so I'm going to, do we want to vote on anything here? Do we
How
wanna-
about, can we do A and,
A and E? I'd be willing to vote on A and E.
One note on E is, and I think it's Article 21 now, but I can't remember. It has a number now, all of them do. Town council did have a number of comments on this.
On the open space?
Yes, and among them was that she said, an awful lot of this sounds like special permit, and you're saying it's by right. And then she also points out to a court case, Wall Street Development versus Town of Westwood, where the court ruled something to the effect that the subdivision control law determines subdivisions that are subdivisions are by right, and you can't make them by special permit. So I've responded to her comments, am waiting for a response, but just to let you know that some issues have been, she had other issues too, but that was the big one.
Other
And
towns have done the same thing.
I know, and I pointed
And
that out.
for
and I-
quite a long time. Westwood did it in 1978, I think. And it
Well,
still
and it was in
stands.
Westwood that this court case took place.
Oh, really?
But also, the court case was 2008. The state model came out in, I think, 2012. I have to believe they took that, although, like, I shouldn't assume, but you'd think that would have been taken into account, so. Anyway, we'll see how she responds.
Yeah.
What were the other things that the town council was concerned about?
Sorry, Rick.
I printed them out so I would have them to go over them here, and I left them in the office. But a couple of examples at least that I recall are the parking, how is parking, we say a limit of 2 off-street. So if someone has a long driveway where they could park 4 cars in a row, does that count? How are we interpreting parking spaces? And then to just say additional parking for guests must be part of the plan. She also questioned, garage spaces counted, so if you have garage spaces, 2, then you can't have, and you almost by default have to have 2 more out in the driveway because you can't get in and out without them. She had a couple of technical things like that.
So wouldn't those also be similarly written in the by right regular subdivision, and what would really be the difference? And I guess my question is just, I mean, I get that those are issues that maybe need to be addressed, but if we're looking at presenting something that's an alternative to what's already by right, are those types of questions much different between the two plans?
Well, that one was,
For the-
had nothing to do with whether it's by right or special permit, just a practical thing of how are you interpreting this and how are you measuring it and all that, but, and then the other major thing she had, more major but not significant, was some of like the maintenance requirement. What happens to the open space? You can't compel people to donate the open space to the Conservation Commission. She had some questions about the legality of how we say that. I know, again, it's done elsewhere.
it may be owned by any of these options.
Any of those options.
One is
And-
the homeowners association.
And that's specified in state law. I think she was more concerned with, after that, it says that,
Oh, conditional grant to the Conservation Commission.
yes, yes. And then the maintenance too, about the town having the right to go in to maintain private property, if that comes up. And she says there's other state laws that address how you do that. So my question back to her was that, so maybe that's something that could just be deleted from here because it's addressed in other laws. So anyway, I think those are the most significant of her comments. And I'll send you the whole bylaw with her comments.
With her
and-
comments, but then it's public info.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
I don't think you can.
No, you're right.
But I think you covered it. Which made me feel like, what are we, the guinea pigs? It just seemed like she raised a lot of issues in something that has been around for a while, but maybe not been used. So, some of it does seem sort of basic and some of it nuanced. I think getting her feedback, though, is important. We also sent some questions from somebody on the Energy Committee about the language in solar, and you sent it on to council. So let's just continue all of them. I mean, it means that we have more work to do on the 21st, but in terms of reporting to advisory, Article A, the apartments, we're in favor with a slight language change. Outdoor entertainment needs work. We're gonna work on it. Article C is agriculture. Same thing, I guess it's fair to say needs work.
I mean, Article C, it sounds like there's clarification of whether
Yeah, the state laws,
the state law covers what we were intending to try and
yeah,
enable.
yeah. I think that's the main question. So we need legal opinion. Then Article D, solar. Sounds like is it fair to say we're in favor with some language that we're gonna look at in the state model?
For Article D, yeah.
Yeah. For Article D, and then open space. I think hearing back from the town council and then making some changes, Gino, that we can distribute. But open space, I think, the big question is, do we want to make it by right or not? I do. And is it fair to say we're all in favor of open space?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
We had talked about that. This has been
Right.
part of our conversation for these past 2 years.
Did we cover talking about entertainment, town center? I forget which one that is, but,
I guess we're struggling with,
there's a lot of, yeah.
we're struggling with the,
Check with the
Yes, we need to
police,
check with police.
non-amplified music, and different schedule, the number of days versus time, and I think, say, after 8 PM, say 43.5 decibels.
It would be worth maybe meeting with Jen another time
Yeah.
and, giving her this feedback and saying, okay.
Anybody want to do that before?
set that up. I guess I also, though.
You ever
do-
not raise your hand?
I do, though, in the back of my mind also goes back to, though, we've now expanded this to now be restrictions that don't exist in our business general district, and we're now adding
Right.
restrictions.
That was a great point. You made that well.
But, I
It
mean,
gives
but-
greater
and so if
control.
we, anything that we, when we're looking at what do we want to do to, and we're thinking, we just want to make sure that we're not just thinking about restaurants when we
Right.
figure out our time schedule and
Yep. Okay. I think that's it. So, is there a motion to continue to the 21st at 7
motion to
PM?
continue discussion of the 5 articles to the 21st of March.
The hearing, yeah.
Second.
Further discussion? All those in favor? Okay, the hearing is continued.
7 o'clock. That's part of your motion, right?
Sorry.
And on our agenda, I'm looking for our agenda.
Housing issues, general plan update, annual report. Should we look at the, as far as,
I think we should just say on housing issues, the charrette, the developer has said under advice of his counsel, doesn't want to do the charrette now. He's, that, by, I think by, in his language, by implication, he's willing to do it later. But he wants to wait till he's a little further down the pike.
Are we done with the open meeting?
The hearing, we're in
Yes.
open meeting now.
Or we're going to be, is the entire evening going to be an open meeting?
Yes,
Oh, okay.
yeah. Yeah,
Even the non-article component?
yeah, it's all,
Okay.
just like any other planning board meeting, it's all
are you referring to whether we needed to continue having a
televised.
televised?
Yes,
Yeah.
Since the hearing section is
Um,
the hearing is done, I'm wondering about.
Yeah, we can, I guess we can
Let him
turn off the
perform and
TV.
go home.
Good. Rick, do you want to,
sign off, and we'll do our nitty-gritty on minutes and stuff.
all right, so the hearing has been continued, and we're going to be off camera. So for anybody else, we will not be recorded. But it's still an open meeting, and we're keeping
Oh, of course,
minutes.
it's always open.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I used the wrong language.
Yeah, no, that's good.
But I was just feeling sorry for him.
Yeah, I'm feeling sorry for us, too.
But we're doing it to ourselves.
Yes, all set. Thank you very much.